Chapter 53. Guan Yu saw the seriousness in his words and knew what he wanted to do, so he did as he was told. A moment later, a flower bloomed in front of them. Xianxia didn't say anything. Before the flowers withered, he quickly plucked a flower. He pinched the flower stem and quickly rubbed it against the other flowers. Soon, the stamen of the flower in his hand had intimate contact with the other stamens. Guan Yu didn't know what he was doing. Qin Feng stopped what he was doing. Even the white fox looked at Xianxia. The three of them looked at the flower with curiosity. Suddenly Xianxia smiled and said, "That's right. It should be like this." What happened next surprised the three of them. The flower that they thought would wither did not wither immediately. Instead, there was an additional procedure. The center of the petals began to bear fruits. After the fruits gradually took shape, the petals began to wither. After Xianxia did something to it, the plant didn't wilt. Instead, the wilting process turned into blooming. The three of them looked at Xianxia in disbelief. Guan Yu mumbled, "How is this possible?" Although the question he raised could not be considered as deliberately making things difficult for Big Boss Yu, it was still a little provocative. However, he never expected that Big Boss Yu would be able to solve the problem that even White Fox could not solve with just a wave of his hand. The peerless White Fox gracefully walked to the front of the fruit-bearing plant. Her slender jade-like fingers plucked one of the fruits. After her fingernails pinched it open, there were black seeds lying inside. She picked it up and placed it in front of her jade-like nose to sniff it. Her face was full of surprise. Qin Feng's resentful eyes were now looking at Xianxia with a hint of respect. Actually, to Xianxia this was common sense in his previous world. This was because there were no insects or bees to pollinate the flowers. These plants could only bloom but not bear fruit. If they didn't bear fruit, they wouldn't have any seeds. In his previous world, even elementary school students would know about this. Now that he was doing it, it was a little shocking. Xianxia couldn't help but feel embarrassed when he saw the three of them looking at him with stars of worship in their eyes. He chuckled and said, "Don't worship me. I'm just a legend. Look at you. Tell me what's going on." The white fox held the peeled fruit in her hand and shouted. Xianxia laughed and rubbed his nose. "Sister. It's a long story. It involves botany and biology. It's a huge systematic subject. I'm afraid you won't understand." At this point, he saw that the three of them had a look of curiosity in their eyes. His expression also became serious as he said, "I'm afraid that you won't understand if I explain it in a complicated way. I'll explain it in a simpler way. Everything in the world was divided into yin and yang. If there was a sky, there would be an earth. Just like if there was a sun in the sky, there would also be a moon. If there is light, there will be darkness. Everything in the world is also divided into yin and yang, which is what we call male and female. But I've already said it very simply. I don't know if it's too complicated. Do you understand?" The three of them nodded to show that they understood. "It's good. Then I'll continue. Listen carefully." Xianxia made a fist and coughed. He continued, "Everything in the world is divided into yin and yang, male and female. It should be easy for you to understand. Whether it's humans, pigs, dogs, cows or sheep, they are all divided into male and female. A man alone can't give birth to a child. Similarly, a woman alone can't give birth to a child. Therefore, there needs to be a union between a man and a woman. No matter if it's 2 legs or 4 legs, it's the same. I call these things that can move and walk zoology. Above zoology is biology. Biology refers to all living things in the world. Living things include plants. The so-called plants are what I'm going to talk about next. This is botany. But let me ask you one more time. Do you understand?" The three of them nodded again. They originally had a little bit of doubt in their hearts, but it was dispelled by his well-founded words. The atmosphere of learning was very strong. Xianxia was very satisfied with this effect. He pretended to say again, "What are plants?" Flowers, trees, fruits, and vegetables that we usually eat belong to the category of plants. This includes the flowers and plants that the three of you are planting. They can grow naturally. Of course, this involves a higher level of natural science. You won't understand even if I explain it, so I won't say it. These flowers and plants can grow naturally. They are also living things. Therefore, they are also within the scope of biology. Don't underestimate these flowers and plants. They are the same as the animals in zoology that we talked about earlier. They also have yin and yang, and they also need to be combined. Guan Yu asked me why these plants only bloom but not bear fruit. Now I'll explain it to you in detail. I've talked too much. I'm very thirsty. Is there any water here? Yes. Qin Feng replied as he scooped up a ladle of water from a nearby bucket and respectfully brought it to Yu Qianqiu. There was no trace of resentment on Yu Qianqiu's face. Yu Qianqiu drank the water and returned the ladle to him. He said, "Thank you." He then continued, "Why do the flowers that you plant only bloom but not bear fruit?" He pointed to a plant that was full of flowers and said, "There are many flowers blooming here. Don't they all look the same?" Yes, they all look the same, but they are not. These flowers are also divided into yin and yang. If they want to bear fruit and produce seeds just like humans, they also need to combine yin and yang. However, they can't combine like humans. Therefore, they need external help. Just like what I did just now, it's also one of the ways to help them combine. Hearing this, Guan Yu was puzzled. That can't be right. The flowers and plants in the outside world haven't been helped by humans to combine, but they still bloom and produce seeds. Qin Feng and the white fox also looked at him suspiciously. Obviously, they agreed with what Guan Yu said. That's a very good question. It involves entomology and zoology. Yu Qianqiu expressed his praise and said, "Of course, the flowers and plants outside are not helped by humans. They are other animals, which are the insects and animals." What are insects? All of you should have seen butterflies, bees, and other insects, right? If you have observed carefully, you will find that insects like bees like to hover on all kinds of blooming flowers. After they get pollen on the flowers, when they land on another flower, they naturally help the flowers to complete a union. The bees are the medium between them, so the plants outside can bloom, bear fruit, and reproduce. If you don't believe me, I can bring some bees in from the outside next time. Then you will know if what I said is true. After his explanation, the three of them suddenly understood. Everyone had seen the habits of bees and butterflies. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed to be the case. Although they didn't have a direct impression, the three of them basically believed what he said was true. I didn't expect a half-baked person like me to be able to make such a big noise here. I actually have the talent to be a teacher. It's really rare. Yu Qianqiu held back the pride in his heart and didn't show it. He said with a smile, "At this point, everyone should know what is going on. There is no need to say more complicated things. Let's stop here." Chapter 54. They had heard it all. The three of them had complicated looks in their eyes. They had not expected Yu Qianqiu to be so knowledgeable. Zoology, botany, natural science, and entomology were all unheard of. Their horizons had been broadened today. Young Qin Feng's eyes were filled with admiration, while Guan Yu looked slightly ashamed. Yu Qianqiu seemed to see a strange light in the white fox's eyes, which made his heart beat faster. Yu Qianqiu remembered why he had come and said nervously, "Sister, there's something I need your help with." The white fox glanced at him with her bright eyes and softly replied, Seeing that his sister had agreed, Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. He hurriedly took out the pill recipe jade archive and handed it over, saying, "I know your skills are extraordinary, sister. There's something recorded in this jade archive that I would like to take a look at, but someone has placed heavy restrictions on it. I'll have to trouble sister to help me open it." Guan Yu and Qin Feng did not care about what they were talking about. The two of them ran to an empty space to examine the botany that Yu Qianqiu had mentioned. The white fox took the pill recipe jade archive and examined it. Her brows furrowed slightly. Yu Qianqiu asked nervously, "Sister, is it impossible to remove?" The white fox shook her head lightly and said, "The person who set up the restrictions has a very high level of attainment in formations. There are a total of 7 layers of restrictions. The first layer has already been broken and the first few layers are not difficult for me. However, the last few layers are ones that I have never seen before. I'm afraid it will take some time to break them. Otherwise, forcefully breaking them will damage the items inside." As she finished speaking, her slender fingers began to move on the jade archive. Yu Qianqiu knew that she was breaking the restrictions, but he could not understand what she was doing. He felt that it was extremely mysterious. After 3 rays of white light flashed on the jade archive, the white fox's fingers stopped moving. After a long while, she exhaled and returned the jade archive, saying, "I've broken 3 of the remaining 6 layers of restrictions. I can't break the remaining 3 for now. I've memorized them, but I need some time to think about them. Yu Qianqiu took the jade archive and smiled sheepishly. Breaking through 3 layers is enough. Don't worry about the rest. Sister can think about it slowly. The white fox nodded and stared at him without saying anything else. It turned around and walked toward the bamboo house outside the garden. On the other side, Guan Yu and Qin Feng exclaimed in amazement. Apparently, the results of the experiment were miraculous. Yu Qianqiu put away the jade archive and walked over with a smile on his face. When he saw Qin Feng, he suddenly thought of someone else. That day in the 100 Flowers Valley, aside from Qin Feng, he had also recruited a person who made and sold the fallen immortal incense. How come he hadn't seen Qin Feng after so many visits? Yuntong, I have something to ask you. Guan Yu patted the dirt off his hands and stood up with a smile. What's the matter? Yu Qianqiu asked curiously. Aside from Qin Feng, I brought another person with me. How come I haven't seen him after so many visits? Where did he go? Guan Yu was taken aback. He suddenly laughed and said, You're talking about that guy. He then put his mouth next to Yu Qianqiu's ear and whispered a few words. When Yu Qianqiu heard this, his expression changed drastically. He cursed, serves him right. It turned out that after the person who sold the incense was recruited, his primordial spirit was also forcefully extracted by the white fox, just like Qin Feng. However, when he saw the white fox's appearance, he was immediately shocked and his lust was aroused. After that, he even tried to use the fallen immortal to pluck flowers without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. It was unknown whether he was truly unaware or just pretending to be unaware. His primordial spirit was already in the other party's hands. How could his every move escape her notice? As a result, the white fox destroyed his natal primordial spirit and turned his bones into ashes as fertilizer for the flowers. Sigh. What a pity for such a talented person. Forget it, he asked for it. You can't blame anyone else. You guys have fun, I'll take my leave first. See you later. Yu Qianqiu said regretfully. Wait. Guan Yu pulled him back and said, Remember to bring a hive of bees when you come again. I want to understand the relationship between botany and zoology. Alright, I'll keep that in mind. Returning to his room on supporting Immortal Island, Miao Yi listened carefully to make sure that there was no movement outside. He impatiently took out the pill recipe jade archive and began studying it. He inserted his divine sense into the jade archive and started reading from the first layer. Actually, the first layer wasn't a pill recipe. Instead, it explained some common knowledge about pill refining and the necessary preparations. For example, the best type of fire to use for pill refining and the best type of pill furnace to increase the success rate of pill refining. There was a whole bunch of information written on it. For Yu Qianqiu, who was a complete layman in pill refining, these headache-inducing questions were exactly what he needed to understand. These were the things he lacked. Hence, he read very attentively, memorizing every single word as he read. The second layer wasn't a pill recipe either. As soon as Yu Qianqiu's divine sense entered the jade archive, he felt as though he had entered a sea of various spiritual plants. Not only were the names and medicinal effects of the various spiritual plants described in detail, but even the shapes and appearances of the herbs were vividly displayed before his eyes. The level of detail was enough to make one's hair stand on end. Even the growth habits of each herb and the places where it was easy to collect them were listed. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. It wasn't just a normal shock but a very, very shock. Even though he knew nothing about medicinal herbs or pill refining, he now knew that he had picked up a treasure. He was glad that he had made a wise decision to obtain this item from Lu Zhenguang. If he had given up on such a good item, he would be worse than a pig or a dog. Aside from his shock, he couldn't help but think back to the alchemy sect of yesteryear. A sect that was founded on pills had an unparalleled level of attainment in the field of alchemy. Just by looking at the countless number of medicinal herbs recorded in detail in the second layer, one could tell how much blood, sweat, and tears of many generations had been spent to gather them. Just this layer alone was enough to make it a rare treasure of the world. If someone wanted to rebuild the alchemy sect, he believed that with this jade archive of pill recipes, there wouldn't be any technical obstacles. It was impossible to memorize so many medicinal herbs in a short amount of time. He could only leave them for later. Sighing, Yu Qianqiu's divine sense entered the third layer. From the opening words of this layer, he could tell that it recorded various pill recipes suitable for use by foundation-building cultivators. Beside the name of each pill recipe was written the effects of the pill. Below it was a list of the required medicinal herbs. Even the order and timing of the medicinal herbs to be used in the concoction, and the age of the medicinal herbs were written down in detail. There were also various problems that would occur before the concoction of the pill was completed. This was really good stuff. Even if a layman came across this item, as long as he followed the instructions, he would be able to concoct a miraculous medicinal pill. He didn't expect that a mere foundation-building cultivator would be able to use so many medicinal pills to aid their cultivation. This was really strange. Since the alchemy sect was able to concoct so many miraculous medicinal pills to raise their cultivation, then their strength shouldn't be weak. How could they have been exterminated by someone? As Xianxia was reading, his eyelids suddenly twitched. The 3 words "foundation-building pill" appeared before his eyes, immediately attracting his attention. Chapter 55. After looking at it carefully, he realized that it was the pill recipe for the foundation-building pill. This pill recipe alone required 9 types of spiritual plants. Xianxia hurriedly noted down the names of the spiritual plants and the order of refinement. This was exactly what he needed. The 4th layer was the pill recipe for the core formation realm. Xianxia casually glanced at it. His mind was preoccupied with the foundation-building pill, so he lost interest in reading any further. The voices of Ling Feng and the others came from outside. He carefully put away the jade archive containing the pill recipe. "Why don't I see you, Xianxia?" It was Yan Shu's voice. Xianxia opened the door and shouted, he's here. "Greetings, Grandmaster Yan." He hurriedly jogged over to Yan Shu and bowed with a smile, then greeted the other 3 with a smile. Yan Shu stared at him coldly and said, "From today onwards, you will work together with the 3 of them. If you dare to slack off, you will be severely punished. Do the 4 of you understand?" The last sentence was meant for everyone to hear. Only Xianxia smiled flatteringly and said, "Understood." The other 3 remained expressionless. Yan Shu's expression darkened. He snorted coldly and turned to leave. "Grandmaster Yan, take care." Xianxia smiled as he watched Yan Shu leave. He then straightened his slightly bowed waist. Suddenly he realized that the 3 people beside him were looking at him with disdain. It was obvious that they weren't interested in his flattery. Xianxia looked at the 3 of them and smiled. "My 3 brothers, I'll be working with you from today onwards. Please take good care of me." Beizi glanced at him and mocked, "You're Elder Guan's disciple. It's not our turn to take care of you. If you want to take care of someone, you should at least look for your Grandmaster Yan." Ling Feng didn't even look him in the eye and said, "Let's go. Don't give Yan Shu an excuse." Xianping was even more ruthless. He shouted, "Wait." He then ran into his room and brought out the huge jug of wine that he had drunk yesterday. When he passed by Xianxia, he said, "I drank with a dog yesterday, I'm ashamed." He then threw the jug of wine down the hill outside the courtyard. The 3 of them then walked out of the courtyard. Xianxia was stunned for a moment before he understood what Xianping meant. This was the first time he had heard Xianping say so many words in one sentence. He didn't expect that Xianping was actually scolding him. Looking at the figure walking away, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. Yesterday they were drinking together like brothers, but today they were like enemies. He had no choice but to follow them. He thought to himself, these 3 guys have really bad characters. They really hate evil as if it's their own enemy. I don't know if I should say that it's good that they're upright or that they're pedantic. No wonder they're not tolerated by others. I wanted to make friends with them, but it seems like it's not enough. Forget it, I'll wait and see. He followed the 3 of them to the great hall of the Alchemy Pavilion. Many disciples were bustling about. Yan Shu was already waiting for them outside the hall. When he saw the 4 of them, he took out 4 jade archives and handed them to them. He said coldly, "This is your mission for today. Those who fail to complete it will be severely punished." Seeing that Ling Feng and the others had released their divine sense to examine the jade archives, Xianxia was about to do the same. Suddenly he saw 3 people walking out of the great hall. He knew all 3 of them. The ones walking in front were Guan Weiwu and Elder Fei of Wanfen Garden. The two of them were talking as they walked. Behind them was a beautiful woman. Xianxia had met her once before. She was the woman he had met in the shop on Fuxian Island in the 100 Flowers Valley. He remembered that there was a man with this woman. The two of them looked very similar. He guessed that they were either brother or sister. The two of them addressed Elder Qin as senior uncle. Obviously, they didn't use the messy form of address on Fuxian Island. The shopkeeper in the shop addressed them as young palace master and young Mississippi. It seemed like this girl had a powerful background. When they walked to the side of the few people outside the hall, Elder Guan, who had always been domineering, actually said to Elder Fei politely, "Please." Elder Fei smiled bitterly and said, "Just don't push my Wanfen garden too hard in the future." The arrival of the two alarmed the crowd. One after another they greeted, "Elder Guan, Elder Fei." Only Xianxia called out, "Greetings, master." It was unusually ear-piercing and attracted the attention of the crowd. When Guan Weiwu saw that it was Xianxia, he happily nodded at him. Clearly, it wasn't as Ling Feng and the others had said, that this muddle-headed master would forget who his disciple was. When Elder Fei saw that it was Xianxia, his face twitched slightly as if he had recalled some unpleasant memories. Then he rolled his eyes and stared at Xianxia, enunciating each word clearly. "So it's Xianxia." There was something wrong with this old fellow. Could it be that he was still brooding over the Immortal supporting token? Xianxia suddenly felt that something was wrong. Thinking that this was the Alchemy Pavilion, he couldn't do anything to him, so he greeted, "Greetings, Elder Fei." "You're Xianxia?" The woman behind the two elders suddenly asked and then stopped talking. Xianxia was stunned. How did she know me? Seemed like I was very famous on Fuxian Island. Elder Guan looked at the woman strangely and asked, "You knew him before?" The woman shook her head and didn't say anything. Seemed like she was thinking about something. Elder Fei smiled mischievously and said, "Elder Guan, I have something to ask of you." As he spoke, his eyes were obviously staring at Xianxia with bad intentions. It made the latter's heart beat faster. Elder Guan also looked at Xianxia and frowned. "What's the matter?" "Elder Guan, you also know that my myriad fragrance garden is short of manpower. The sect leader also said that he would transfer some people to me. I see that your disciple is very smart. Why don't you lend him to me for a while?" Elder Fei said indifferently. Xianxia let out a strange cry. This old fellow was obviously using his position to take revenge. If he really went, who knew what would happen to him? Immediately, a pitiful expression appeared on his face as he looked at Guan Weiwu. This. Elder Guan didn't say anything. He was a pill addict, not an idiot. Naturally, he could see that Elder Fei had bad intentions for his disciple. On the other hand, Yan Shu seemed to see something fishy. He looked at the pitiful Xianxia and then looked at Elder Fei, who had a sinister smile on his face. He smiled thoughtfully. "Why, Elder Guan, you can't bear to part with your disciple?" Elder Fei asked. His eyes glanced at the woman behind him. Elder Guan also looked at the woman and sighed. He said to Xianxia apologetically, "Xianxia, go to Elder Fei's myriad fragrance garden and help him for a while. When you come back, I will personally teach you the way of alchemy." "Master, can I not go?" Xianxia begged. "How dare you?" Yan Shu shouted. "A Qi refinement stage disciple dares to bargain with an elder of our pavilion. Do you still have any respect for Fuxian Island's rules?" Xianxia was startled. "Mother **Ker, what did I do to provoke you? My life is already bitter enough, so why did you run over to join in the fun? Seeing me sucking up to you, do you really not know who you are? Now that my future is uncertain, I don't care who you are." He was immediately enraged. He opened his mouth and shouted even louder than Yan Shu. "Yan Shu, shut up. Who do you think you are? What does it have to do with you that I am talking to my master? Since when did you have the right to interrupt an elder's question? Do you still have any respect for Fuxian Island's rules? Do you think that just because your father is an elder you don't care about the other elders? Do you really think that Fuxian Island belongs to your family? In front of my master and Elder Fei, it's not your turn to show off your might. Get lost." Chapter 56. His words were too vehement, and his voice was loud enough that everyone outside the grand hall could hear him. In an instant, the entire hall fell into a frightening silence. Everyone turned to look at him and almost everyone was dumbfounded. Ling Feng and the other two who were initially mocking Yu Qianzhou for sucking up to him, had their mouths wide open in disbelief. Elder Guan and Elder Fei were also a little dumbfounded. On the other hand, the young woman didn't understand the gravity of the situation, and was a little flabbergasted by everyone's expressions. Yan Shu's face was green and red at the same time. His eyes were protruding out of their sockets and he pointed at Yu Qianzhou with a trembling arm. It seemed that he was extremely angry. Guan Weiwu, who was standing at the side, shouted, "Enough!" Then he looked at Yu Qianzhou and said in an irrefutable tone, "It's decided then. You will follow Elder Fei to the Myriad Fragrance Garden to help out." Seeing that the outcome had been decided and that there was nothing he could do to change it, Yu Qianzhou silently nodded. "Then let's go." Elder Fei smiled as she crossed her arms in front of her stomach. She then led the way down the mountain and the young woman followed closely behind. Yu Qianzhou passed the jade archive in his hand to Ling Feng, then bowed to Guan Weiwu and said, "Take care, master." Then he left the mountain. Everyone watched his silhouette as he descended the mountain. Only Yan Shu's eyes were filled with resentment. At the same time, there were quite a few people who were looking at Yan Shu with gloating expressions. It seemed that he wasn't that popular after all. Elder Fei leisurely walked down the mountain, while the young and beautiful woman followed suit. Yu Qianzhou lagged behind the two of them by about a dozen meters. If this had happened in the past, he would have followed closely behind the young woman as well. Even if he didn't get intimate with her, it would still be a pleasure to follow behind a beautiful woman and watch her swaying her buttocks. Of course, the premise was that Chu Pinger and the White Fox didn't know about it and he wasn't in a bad mood. He was indeed in a terrible mood. He had just seen a glimmer of a bright future from the pill formula Jade Archive when he unexpectedly bumped into Elder Fei. Elder Fei must not have had any good intentions in dragging him to the Myriad Fragrance Garden. From what he knew, most cultivators were at the level of beasts, especially the old ones. Each of them had either lived for more than 100 years or 200 to 300 years. Their humanity had long been eaten by dogs, and they acted according to their own whims. How dangerous! Elder Fei Dinan stopped his footsteps and turned his head to look at the dejected Yu Qianzhou. With a slight smile he shouted, "Yu Qianzhou, come here." Then he continued to walk down the mountain. Yu Qianzhou was stunned. He had no choice but to lower his head when he was under someone else's roof. He was following him now. Without saying a word, he eagerly ran to Elder Fei's side and said with a flattering smile, "Elder Fei, what instructions do you have for me? If there is anything, just tell me. I, Yu Qianzhou, will not hesitate to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames." Looking at Yu Qianzhou's despicable face, Ferdinand was greatly astonished. The words that were just about to come out of his mouth could not come out. To be honest, when Ferdinand saw Yu Qianzhou, he was indeed a little unhappy in his heart. However, he did not have any intention of harming him. However, he still had the intention of teasing and fooling around with him. Hence he suddenly thought of asking for him. Just now, when he suddenly saw Yu Qianzhou on the mountain, he could not help but look at Yu Qianzhou in a new light. Nowadays there were really fewer and fewer young people like him. He no longer had the intention of fooling around with him. Instead he began to care for him. However, this despicable face of Yu Qianzhou and his fearless attitude just now were worlds apart. It was very unappetizing. Ferdinand immediately snorted coldly and said, "Nothing, I just want you to hurry up and follow me." The worse his tone was, the more Yu Qianzhou nodded and bowed, saying yes. Yu Qianzhou was also not willing to follow beside Ferdinand and watch his face. He could not help but find a reason to take a few steps back. He pretended to greet the beauty on the side and said with a smile, "I am Yu Qianzhou, Qi Refining Level 10. May I know how I should address you?" The woman also smiled and replied to him, "Xianxia Foundation Establishment Early Stage. I just entered supporting Immortal Island today and am under Elder Fei of Myriad Fragrance Garden." "Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. So it is Senior Master Yan." Yu Qianzhou bowed and said. The woman nodded and looked at Yu Qianzhou from head to toe. She also felt strange in her heart. This person is like a completely different person from just now. Myriad Fragrance Garden occupied the largest area among all the branches of supporting Immortal Island. It was also the place with the most abundant spiritual qi. There was no other reason for this. Spiritual qi was needed to grow spiritual grasses. Of course, the land was also indispensable. Otherwise, how could it supply such a large sect? At the same time, Myriad Fragrance Garden was also the place with the most female disciples in the entire supporting Immortal Island. Almost 99% of the female disciples were in Myriad Fragrance Garden. There were probably close to 1,000 of them. Of course, there was a reason for this. Spiritual grasses were different from ordinary herbs. They needed to be carefully cared for. Women were naturally more meticulous than men. They were the best candidates to take care of these flowers and plants. It was also not a very strenuous work. The strenuous work was done by the minority of male disciples. Xianxia had not been here for long. He did not have the time to understand or listen to others. Thus he did not know about these things. When he stepped into Myriad Fragrance Garden, which was filled with spiritual qi, fresh air and fragrant air, his eyes were filled with light and graceful figures. There were beautiful women coming and going everywhere. Xianxia rubbed his eyes. He thought that it was an illusion of some formation. He immediately followed behind Ferdinand. He was afraid that he would go to the wrong place and be trapped by the formation. He did not expect Elder Fei to rescue him in time if he was trapped. When he heard that this group of thin and plump girls respectfully saluted and called Elder Fei when they saw Ferdinand, and that Ferdinand nodded in return, Xianxia was a little dumbfounded. This was not an illusion. It was real. Myriad Fragrance Garden actually raised so many female disciples. Moreover, all of them were not bad. Damn. Is this Myriad Fragrance Garden or Myriad Flower House? Xianxia was very shocked. If it was not for this extraordinary environment, he would really suspect that he had come to a brothel. He was immediately overwhelmed. It would be a waste not to look. Ferdinand led the two of them to the main hall of Myriad Fragrance Garden. He called someone over and said a few words. Then he brought Yan Zixiaowei to make arrangements. Xianxia was still a little dazzled and did not come back to his senses. Ferdinand, who was sitting high in the main hall, stroked his beard and smiled. He had already made arrangements for him. He lightly shouted, "Come." At the same time he also woke up Xianxia. A female disciple outside the door hurriedly walked over and saluted, "Elder." Elder Fei pointed at Xianxia and said, "This is the disciple I borrowed from the Alchemy Pavilion to help. His name is Xianxia. Bring him to Majugu. Tell Majugu that the matter of raising spirit grass in Myriad Fragrance Garden will be handed over to Xianxia." A surprised look flashed on the female disciple's face. She saluted and said, "Disciple understands. What kind of work is raising spirit grass?" As Xianxia was secretly muttering, he heard Ferdinand ask, "Xianxia, do you have any dissatisfaction with this elder's arrangement for you?" No. Disciple resolutely obeys Elder Fei's arrangement. Xianxia smiled respectfully. "That's good." Ferdinand waved his hand and said, "Bring him away." Yes. The female disciple respectfully retreated. Xianxia vaguely felt that something was wrong. It was not good for him to say anything more. He could only follow the female disciple obediently. Chapter 57. Along the way, Xianxia was still wondering what the spirit-nurturing grass was for. And who was that Majugu? She must be someone extraordinary for Elder Fei, who was in charge of Myriad Fragrance Garden, to call her aunt. Thinking about this, he felt slightly nervous. The female disciple who led the way at the side sized Xianxia up from time to time. Naturally, it wasn't because she had taken a fancy to him. With his ordinary appearance that was at the bottom of the pile of ordinary people, there were probably very few people that would take a fancy to him. He was also wondering who this person was. Elder Fei personally borrowed him from the Alchemy Pavilion. Why did he make him do the work of nurturing the spirit herbs? The female disciple suddenly recalled a rumor a few days ago. There was an itinerant cultivator who entered supporting Immortal Island with an immortal supporting medallion. He was the disciple of Alchemy Pavilion's Elder Guan. It was said that dozens of elders fought fiercely for the immortal supporting medallion. In the end, it was Elder Guan who obtained the immortal supporting medallion. That itinerant cultivator's name was Xianxia. Could it be this person? Thinking about this, the doubts in her heart were easily resolved. When she looked at Xianxia again, a trace of pity appeared in her eyes. Xianxia felt gloomy. He looked at the scenery of Myriad Fragrance Garden to relieve his worries. There were all kinds of spirit herbs planted all around the garden. smelling the refreshing fragrance. There were many beauties working in the garden. There were all kinds of terrains in the Wanfen garden. There were high hills, low depressions and flatlands, and all kinds of spiritual herbs were planted everywhere. There were also many flowers and fruits. The colorful spiritual herbs swayed in the breeze. Occasionally, when the wind was strong, the hem of a skirt would be blown up and a delicate hand would be pressed down. It made one's imagination run wild. What a great place. It turned out that spiritual herbs and beauties were also a pretty good scenery. Yu Qianchou's worries eased a lot. At the same time, he couldn't help but admire the eyesight of the major sects in the cultivation world when it came to accepting disciples. Not all of the female disciples were outstanding beauties, but because they all cultivated their bones, their appearances were much better than ordinary mortals. Of course, not everyone with a good bone structure had a good appearance. There were some people who were ugly but talented, but they were in the minority. All in all, as far as the eye could see, the spiritual herbs were all pretty girls. There were also women who were in their prime and were slightly more mature and alluring. Yu Qianchou was a little absent-minded as he wondered if he had arrived at Womanland. They arrived at the foot of a mountain. It wasn't really a mountain, but it was at most a slightly higher hill. However, it occupied quite a large area. There were very few trees around the hill, and most of them were covered by various kinds of spirit herbs. The entire hilltop was occupied by an antique courtyard. It was obvious that it was a building that had existed for a long time. Although Yu Qianchou's cultivation level was not high, along the way he noticed that the spiritual energy nurtured by this mountain was the most abundant. The spiritual energy had already condensed into a faint mist. The female disciple stopped and reminded him, "Yu Qianchou, this hilltop is the residence of consecrated Aunt Jiu. Consecrated Aunt Jiu doesn't like noise, so don't make too much noise later." Yu Qianchou thought that she was reminding him out of kindness, but from the faint fear on her face, he could see that she was afraid that he would implicate her. The two of them were not familiar with each other, let alone a woman, so he didn't mind. He looked at the building on the hilltop and asked, "Is consecrated Aunt Jiu the Ma Jiu that Elder Fei mentioned?" "Lower your voice." The female disciple seemed to be startled by his words. "Ma Jiugu is not someone we can call," she said in a soft voice. "Elder Fei only calls her that in front of us, but he would never dare to call her that in front of Reverend Jiugu. Consecrated Aunt Jiu used to be the aunt of the former sect leader, and also the previous elder who presided over Wanfen Garden. Her cultivation level has reached the late stage of passing calamity, and even the current sect leader has to greet her and call her Aunt Jiu." Yu Qianchou replied with an "oh," and looked at the hilltop. He thought, so it's Ferdinand who wants to save face. But why did he send me to the old monster's place? Does he want to use the old monster to kill me? He wondered who would be stronger in a fight between the old monster and his sister. Both of them were in the late stage of passing calamity. "Let's go," the female disciple said. Yu Qianchou nodded. He had originally wanted to get close to her and ask her what her name was, but seeing how timid she was and how she could barely be considered a beauty, he gave up on that thought. Going up the bluestone stairs to the hilltop and standing outside the wall, Yu Qianchou found that the courtyard was really big and the wall was really high. The tall courtyard gate was open and there was no one guarding the gate. He raised his head and looked at the three big words "Mulberry Garden" engraved on the top of the courtyard gate. Then he followed the respectful female disciple and quietly walked in. As soon as he entered, for some reason, Yu Qianchou suddenly felt that the surrounding temperature dropped a lot. The inside of the wall and the outside seemed to be two different worlds. Walking through the dark courtyard surrounded by trees and green vines, his eyes suddenly opened up. There were all kinds of strange flowers and plants. There were actually many gardens inside, and they were also planted with spirit herbs. In each garden there were one or two young girls working. Fortunately, the appearance of the young girls here seemed to be a grade higher than what he saw outside. A beautiful and dignified woman greeted the two of them with a smile. The female disciple hurriedly bowed and said, "Elder Lon." This made Yu Qianchou also bow. That Elder Lon smiled and said, "What brings you here?" The female disciple pointed at Yu Qianchou and replied, "This person is a disciple that Elder Fei borrowed from the Alchemy Pavilion. His name is Yu Qianchou. Elder Fei said that he will be sent to Jiugu to worship the spirit herb." Yu Qianchou? Spirit herb? Elder Lon was stunned. Her eyes paused on Yu Qianzhou and then she frowned and said, "What the hell is Fei Dinan doing? Alright, leave him to me. You can go back." Yes. The female disciple obeyed and left. After listening to their conversation, Yu Qianzhou only felt uncomfortable and secretly cursed in his heart. Damn. Since when did I become a thing that can be sent here and there? You come with me. Elder Lon smiled. Yes. Yu Qianzhou obeyed the order and followed her. As they passed through several spirit herb gardens, Yu Qianzhou thought to himself that the spirit herbs planted here were definitely more precious than those planted outside. He couldn't help but look around, and to his surprise he discovered that he had seen many of the spirit herbs in the pill recipe jade archive. He followed the woman to a courtyard. Once he entered the courtyard he suddenly felt that the temperature had dropped a lot. He saw a well in front of him. When he walked past the well he felt even more bone-chilling cold. Yu Qianzhou shivered from the cold. Although his cultivation level wasn't high, it was not a problem for him to be impervious to heat and cold. He didn't expect this small well to be so powerful. It was as if the temperature of the entire mountaintop was low because of this well. He couldn't help but glance at the well. The water wasn't deep and he could see it by tilting his head. Strangely, even though the temperature was so low, the well water didn't freeze. It gave the courtyard an even greater sense of mystery. In the courtyard, a white-haired old woman was holding a young and beautiful girl's hand as she spoke. When Yu Qianzhou saw the girl he was stunned. It was Xianxia whom he had parted ways with not too long ago. Why was she here? He felt strange. When he got closer he realized that the old woman's face was full of pockmarks. He couldn't help but think of the majugu that Elder Fei had mentioned. The old woman turned her head and swept a glance at Yu Qianzhou. Her calm gaze actually made the latter's heart palpitate. She opened her mouth and spoke in an aged voice. "Little Lon, who did you bring here?" Xianxia was obviously curious as to why Yu Qianzhou would be here. The two of them nodded at each other. Chapter 58. Hearing the old lady's question, Elder Lon pouted like a little girl and muttered, "Ferdinand sent someone to deliver it to you. He said it's for you to grow spirit herbs. It's simply nonsense." Elder Lan's words proved that the old lady in front of them was Majugu, but looking at the way she spoke she was full of worry and disgust. She didn't look like the beautiful and dignified woman from before. Thinking that most of the elders in Fuxian Island were over 200 years old, a woman over 200 years old acting like a spoiled little girl, it made people shudder. He quickly stepped forward and saluted. "Yu Qianzhou greets Elder Jugu." "Yu Qianzhou?" Majugu seemed to have heard of his name and was stunned. "You're the individual cultivator Yu Qianzhou who joined Fuxian Island with the Immortal supporting token." "Yes, I am." "Didn't I hear that Guan Weiwu accepted you as his disciple? Why did Ferdinand send you here? Are you Qi refining level 10? Strange, I can't see through your cultivation." Elder Lon said angrily, "It must be because of the Immortal supporting token. The dignified elder in charge of Wanfen Garden is actually so narrow-minded. How could she do such a thing? Elder Jugu, you don't even care." Hearing this, Yu Qianzhou's eyes lit up. Perhaps there was hope of returning to the Alchemy Pavilion. Damn. If he knew this would happen he wouldn't have made things so awkward with Yan Shu. Impulsiveness was the devil. "Is that so?" Majugu expressed doubt and laughed. "Ferdinand is your man. If you want to care you do it." "I won't care." Then he changed the topic and said cautiously, "However, he is the elder in charge of the 10,000 Fragrance Garden now. Regardless of the seniority of anyone in the 10,000 Fragrance Garden, Ferdinand's words are the law. I have to obey this rule. Lon Lass, do as Ferdinand says and take him away." Hearing this, Yu Qianzhou's little thoughts that just jumped out sank again. Yes. Elder Lon felt very wronged. Behind her, there was another person who felt even more wronged than her. Of course it was Yu Qianzhou. When he walked out of the courtyard he vaguely heard Xianxia's voice. She seemed to be calling someone great-grandmother. Was it Majugu? In the blink of an eye, Elder Lon turned back into that beautiful and dignified woman. She went outside and threw Yu Qianzhou to a female disciple named Ferong. After giving a few instructions she left. Yu Qianzhou was depressed. This was the first time in his previous life and this life that he had been sold out so many times in one day. Although he was depressed, this big sister Ferong was really unbearable. She looked so thin that she couldn't even withstand a gust of wind. Half of her face was covered by a scar. If one looked at the other half of her face and looked at her figure from the back, she would feel like Zhou Xian who fought against Yang Guifei. She was thin and fat. She was a thin beauty, but one couldn't look at her from the front. Otherwise it would scare people. The clothes she was wearing were a lot older than the clothes of the other Fuxian Island disciples. There were even patches on her shoulders and a small cloth bag was hanging diagonally on her body. As strange. When Furong saw his gaze, she was actually a little evasive. She seemed a little timid. After joining the cultivation world for so long, this was the first time he saw someone afraid of him. He immediately came to his senses. This girl with half a face either had low self-esteem or was a vicious person pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Yu Qianchou bowed and said, "I am Yu Qianchou, Qi Refinement Level 10. Greetings, big sister." Half a face Furong was a little flustered. She hurriedly bowed and said, Furong, Foundation Establishment Late Stage. Greetings, Mr. Yu. Foundation Establishment Late Stage and you still call me Mr.? Yu Qianchou was stunned. He bowed and said, I don't dare. So it's Martial Uncle. Furong was a little uneasy from being called that. She said timidly, Elder Lon told me to hand over the matter of raising spirit herbs in the mulberry grass garden to you. Come with me. After saying that, she turned around and left in a hurry. His back view. It's a pity that face. Yu Qianchou shook his head regretfully. Outside a small room filled with junk, there were 2 buckets, a shoulder pole and a long ladle. These were the 3 things that Furong gave him. Yu Qianchou looked at Furong, who was standing at the side as if she had done something wrong. He then looked at the 3 things suspiciously. These 3 things were very familiar. It was a very familiar combination. However, he couldn't remember where he had seen them before. Martial Uncle Furong, are these for me? What are they for? Yu Qianchou frowned and asked. Spirit raising grass. Furong's voice was almost inaudible. Oh. Yu Qianchou smiled embarrassedly and said, Hee. Martial Uncle, I just entered the sect not long ago. Hee. I really don't know what this spirit raising grass is for. Please enlighten me, Martial Uncle. Then come with me. Furong said in a low voice. She reached out her hand to take the 3 spirit raising grass. Yu Qianchou hurriedly stopped her and said, Let me do it. No need to trouble Martial Uncle. He could now see that this disfigured young Martial Uncle was really timid and shy. However, it didn't mean that he didn't know how to read the situation. The 3 items were snatched by him. He carried 2 buckets on his shoulder with a pole, and a long ladle was placed horizontally on the pole. He smiled and said, Martial Uncle, please. Furong shyly nodded her head. Her 2 small hands held onto the corner of her clothes, turning it over and over without letting go. She led Yu Qianchou to the outside of the courtyard and walked along the tall wall for a full 10 minutes before stopping. There was a small ditch under the wall that was connected to a small pool in front of them. The yellowish-brown liquid in the pool gave off an unpleasant smell. The thing floating on it was basically something that everyone was familiar with, feces. To put it bluntly, the pool in front of them was a cesspool filled with feces and urine. Yu Qianchou looked at the cesspool in front of him as if he was struck by lightning. His eyes widened. There was no need to explain. There was no need to explain anything. He understood everything. He was born in the countryside in his previous life. How could he not understand? The scene of farmers working hard and fertilizing crops in his previous life appeared in his mind. Spirit raising grass? Fertilizing spirit raising grass with human feces and urine? Spirit raising grass with human feces and urine? Spirit raising grass with human feces and urine? How could spirit raising grass absorb this? Yu Qianchou's face first turned pale, then red, then green, then black. He was already showing signs of going berserk. No wonder these 3 things looked familiar at first. They were used for this. Furong, who was at the side, was so scared that she took a few steps back. Yu Qianchou could be heard shouting with a choked throat, F***CK. Raising bullsh *T spirit raising grass. Ferdinand, you have guts. You want me to carry feces. The things on his shoulder were thrown to the ground. Looking at Yu Qianchou, whose eyes were red and who was panting, Furong's hands clenched the corner of her clothes tightly. Her delicate knuckles were white, and there were tears at the corner of her eyes. she said with a slightly choked voice. Mr. You don't have to be angry. This is what I'm doing anyway. You don't have to do it. I won't tell Elder Lon. You can rest at the side. She carefully moved over and slowly squatted down. Her pale little hands picked up the things on the ground and put them away. Chapter 59. Scram. You damned teeth, what are you swinging your tattered face in front of Lousy for? Ugly freak, I don't want you to be a good person, so go to the side and die for Lousy. Xianxia's face was filled with rage. With one kick he sent the bucket that Hibiscus was holding up flying. Once again he angrily shouted, Scram. The latter was so frightened that she trembled as she stood to the side. Her tattered clothes wrapped around her thin and weak body slightly curled up. On one half of her moving face and the other half of her frightening face, soybean-sized teardrops dripped down, but she didn't dare to cry out loud. This was the first time he had suffered such a great humiliation since he came to this world. In addition, he was indeed a temperamental person. When he wasn't provoked, he was willing to be a tortoise's grandson. But once he was angered, not to mention this pitiful older sister Hibiscus who was only at foundation building stage in Ongquangsung, he even cursed Wu Baoru who was at nascent soul stage. Earlier, Yen Shu who was at core formation stage was an example. Looking at Hibiscus's tattered face in front of him, the more he looked at it, the more he felt it was disgusting. In his anger he didn't care about the difference in their cultivation levels, nor did he care about whether or not he could defeat Hibiscus. Instead, step by step he forced his way over and viciously cursed, Cry, you only know how to cry. What are you crying for? Why don't you take a look at your appearance? Damn yin and yang face, ugly freak. The more you cry, the uglier you look. Go to hell. The pitiful Hibiscus was forced to lean against the wall by him step by step. Hearing him curse her viciously, but he didn't let her cry, she really did force back her tears. Sparkling and translucent tears rolled in her eyes, looking very pitiful. If one looked carefully, they would discover that although Hibiscus's face was disfigured, her eyes were exceptionally bright and beautiful. Although they were covered in tears, there was gentleness and kindness in her pitiful eyes. It was unknown whether she was really stupid, cowardly, or really kind. Based on her cultivation level, beating up Xianxia was like chopping vegetables, but she meekly accepted it. Just like that, an average-looking man forced an ugly, weak woman into a corner. The two of them stared at each other, one furious, the other delicate and pitiful. After a long time, seeing that Xianxia's anger seemed to have subsided a little, Hibiscus loosened her hand that was tightly gripping the corner of her clothes and pointed at the manure pit. She said timidly and softly, I'm going to work. If I'm late, I'll make Elder Lon unhappy. Actually, Hibiscus's voice was quite pleasant to listen to. Her voice was thin and neat and her pearly white teeth moved up and down. Her faint words really had the effect of relieving heat. Xianxia was stunned. Was his voice a little too loud just now? Did the old man in the courtyard hear him? He was a little impulsive. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Hibiscus carefully moved out with her back rubbing against the wall. She picked up the wooden barrel that Xianxia had kicked far away and carefully put it back. Her eyes occasionally glanced at him, clearly still a little afraid of him. He then took out a white pill from the slanted cloth bag and tossed it into the cesspool. Tossing a pill into the cesspool? Xianxia seemed to have forgotten that he was still angry and watched curiously. As the pill sank into the cesspool, it instantly reacted and began to bubble. The yellowish-brown substance surged in the pool, making Xianxia feel disgusted and a little nauseous. He could bear it when the thing in the cesspool was not moving, but when it moved, it was really not something that ordinary people could bear. Although he came from a remote village that was already a long time ago. On the other hand, Hibiscus calmly stood at the side. There was no abnormality on her face. Xianxia's nostrils flared. Strange, the smell that was originally in the depths of his memory did not appear. Instead, there was a faint fragrance. It must be the effect of the pill. He wanted to get closer to see what was going on, but no matter how fragrant it was still feces. He was still unwilling to get closer. Hibiscus gently rolled up her worn-out sleeves, revealing two small, sparkling white and tender arms. She grabbed a long scoop and began to pour the feces into two wooden barrels. Xianxia secretly thought that it was a pity that such beautiful hands were used for this. Hibiscus, however, was calm and composed. Once it was filled, Hibiscus inserted the carrying pole between the two barrels. Her slender body gently bent down, and the hard carrying pole landed on her thin and small shoulders. With a slight effort, the two barrels of feces were picked up by this weak woman. Before she left, she glanced at Yu Qianqiu with a lonely gaze as if she was comforting him. "Don't be angry, just rest here. I'll do it." That gaze. In an instant Yu Qianqiu felt something in his chest shatter. Is it a broken heart? No, but I feel my heart ache. Strange, what am I feeling heartache for? I'm not familiar with her. Yu Qianqiu asked himself. Hibiscus's thin and weak body swayed forward while carrying the carrying pole. With her cultivation level, carrying such a load was a piece of cake, but looking at her thin and small figure and the two barrels, it seemed incongruous. Were the barrels too big, or was Hibiscus's figure too thin and small? For some reason, as he watched the steady swaying of the carrying pole, Yu Qianqiu felt an inexplicable pain in his heart. "Wait!" Yu Qianqiu shouted and ran over. Hearing the shout, Hibiscus turned around while carrying the carrying pole. When she saw Yu Qianqiu running over, she was so frightened that she took 2 steps back. The yellow-brown liquid in the barrels immediately swayed and splashed on the ground. Some of it landed on Hibiscus's shoes and the edge of her tattered skirt. "Give it to me." Yu Qianqiu expressionlessly reached out his hand towards the carrying pole. "No need." Hibiscus's slender body refused while carrying the carrying pole. "Give it to me." Yu Qianqiu reached out his hand again. "It's dirty," Hibiscus said softly. "If you're not afraid of it, why should I be afraid? Quickly give it to me." "I'm used to doing it, I'm not afraid of it." Yu Qianqiu's heart tightened again. He exhaled and said, "Did you forget Elderland's instructions? You don't even listen to Elderland anymore? Do you want me to be punished?" Speaking of Elderland, a trace of fear appeared on Hibiscus's face. She didn't know what to do. Without hesitation, Yu Qianqiu reached out his hand and forcibly placed the carrying pole on his shoulder. He turned his head and said with a smile, "You just need to teach me how to do it. Help me hold this and lead the way." As he said this, he handed her the long ladle. Holding the ladle, Hibiscus nodded helplessly. Then she hurriedly led the way. Yu Qianqiu didn't find the big feces disgusting anymore. He tried his best to control the swaying of the two barrels. When the two returned to the courtyard, Hibiscus led him to the garden where the spiritual herbs were planted. She shyly taught him how to fertilize the spiritual herbs. She originally wanted to do it herself, but in the end Yu Qianqiu refused. He only needed her to do it with her mouth. He would take care of everything that had to be done. Yu Qianqiu cooperated with Hibiscus with unprecedented meekness. Wherever Hibiscus pointed, he would obediently do it. The other beauties who were taking care of the spiritual herbs in the garden were all shocked. The ugly Hibiscus actually found a man to help her. There were a lot of spiritual herbs that needed to be fertilized. The small manure pit outside the wall was simply not enough. Hibiscus led him down the mountain to the place where the female disciples of Wanfen Garden lived. There was a place similar to a public toilet. There were many manure pits. The female cultivator's ability to excrete wasn't weak. Yu Qianqiu almost fainted. He never thought that there would be a day where he would come to the women's toilet to pick the fertilizers offered by women. What made him even more incredulous was that there were many ant-level seniors who actually had to fight over the feces. Fighting over the feces with ants? He couldn't help but sigh. The area of spiritual herbs planted in Wanfen Garden wasn't just big. The fertilizers were in short supply. Chapter 60. The aunties were all fat and strong. Even as a man, Yu Qianqiu couldn't compare to their burly bodies. After asking Farong, he found out that these people were people who had broken through Aura Training Realm and reached Foundation Building Realm. Because they had reached Foundation Building Realm, they had avoided the fate of being expelled from Fuxian Island. However, they couldn't break through to Foundation Building Realm again, so they had been lingering at this cultivation level and didn't have much of a future. Therefore, they were assigned to the lowest level of work. The aunties who were carrying the manure buckets looked at the crowded aunties who were very busy. People came and went, and Yu Qianqiu stood among them. As a man, he was too embarrassed to steal their business. Farong shrunk behind him and didn't have the slightest intention of stealing. After waiting for a long time, almost everyone had left. Yu Qianqiu walked to the side of the pool to take a look, and his face immediately twitched. The pool was so dry that the bottom could be seen. The two of them carried their tools and visited a few more manure pits, and they were all the same as before. This martial ant Cho had a weak figure and was shy. She wouldn't steal like those aunties, so he really didn't know how she completed her task of fertilizing. He couldn't help but ask, "Martial Ant Furong, there isn't enough fertilizer on the mountain and it's hard to get it here. How do you complete your daily task?" Furong softly said, "I don't need to fertilize every day. I just need to water them once every 3 days. Being too diligent is bad for the spiritual herbs. I had to rush here a few hours before daybreak to get here." She brought Yu Qianqiu here because she originally thought that as a man he would definitely win against those aunties. Who knew that Yu Qianqiu was as shy as her and too embarrassed to steal? Yu Qianqiu was silent, but the scene that appeared in his mind was a thin and weak woman carrying manure up the mountain in the dark. Actually, he really wanted to ask, weren't foundation building cultivators able to fly on their swords? Why didn't they fly? But thinking about it, if everyone carried manure and flew on their swords, although the scene would be spectacular, it would definitely incur the wrath of the heavens and the resentment of the people. The steward of Fuxian Island definitely wouldn't agree. Since watering the plants once every 3 days was considered to have completed the task, it didn't matter if he didn't pick any now. He could come back tomorrow morning before the sun rose. One of them carried an empty manure bucket, while the other carried a manure ladle as they walked back. Next to a small stream at the foot of the mountain, Hibiscus washed the tools used to raise spirit herbs until they were completely clean. Then she carefully washed both of her fair and tender little hands. Although this girl didn't look good and didn't dress well, she was a hard-working ugly girl who loved cleanliness. If it had been Yu Qianqiu, he would have thrown the bucket to the side when he reached the top of the mountain. Anyway, he would have to continue filling the bucket tomorrow. When he returned to the mulberry garden, he found a problem. Yu Qianqiu didn't have a place to stay. Yu Qianqiu, whose anger was about to flare up again, gradually calmed down when he saw Furong's residence. It was the place where he used to raise spirit herbs and other tools. In the room where the miscellaneous items were stored, there was an empty space. 2 wooden boards were placed on top of 2 stools. This was Furong's bed. Looking at this narrow space, he really couldn't understand. In his previous life, it was said that many people couldn't afford to buy a house because of the high housing prices. Could it be that this phenomenon also existed in the cultivation world? This was too unimaginable. However, the other people in Fuxian Island weren't like this. Even Ling Feng and the other 2 who were the worst in the alchemy pavilion had a small courtyard to live in. There should be a lot of empty rooms in this mulberry garden. This martial Uncle Cho should have a story that he didn't know. Everything showed that she was being abused. In his previous life, it was said that if one didn't have money, one wouldn't be able to buy a house to live in. This place shouldn't be the same if one was ugly. When Furong returned, she seemed to have calmed down. She didn't have the uneasiness she had when she was outside. She calmly told him that she had lived here since she was 5 or 6 years old. She had already lived here for 15 years. She also told Yu Qianqiu that this place was very quiet. Her cultivation talent was quite good. In just a short dozen years she had reached the late stage of foundation establishment. This was considered rare in the cultivation world. However, could it be that she had offended someone when she was young? Otherwise, she wouldn't have been beaten up like this. This didn't make sense. A 5 or 6-year-old child, who could she offend? Who would bother with a wimpy kid? While Yu Qianqiu was feeling puzzled, Furong had already started to tidy up the room. She squeezed her own bed to the side and dug out a stool and a wooden board from the pile of junk. Then she laid out a new wooden bed next to her bed. That was the only empty space left. After cleaning up, she dug out a set of tattered bedding and laid it out. Then she pulled a piece of cloth between the 2 beds. It was a little like the Chu He Han boundary. In the end, she foolishly told him that he could make do with it here. This was how she treated her guests. Looking at her, it seemed that having a bed like this was good enough. Yu Qianqiu really suspected that she had never seen how the other people in Fuxian Island lived. However, she was really confident in her own looks. She knew that if she stayed in the same room as another man, she wouldn't have to worry about that man molesting her. That night, Yu Qianqiu didn't do anything beastly. In fact, he didn't even have the slightest thought. He asked Furong many questions in a roundabout way, wanting to understand more about the mulberry garden. In the end it was as if he didn't ask. Furong knew almost nothing. He could only lie down and sleep soundly. Before daybreak the two of them dragged their things down the mountain. Fortunately there was moonlight in the sky. In addition they had cultivated so their eyesight was much better than ordinary people. Otherwise, going up and down the mountain in the dark would really be a dangerous thing. Their goal was naturally the female toilet. Sure enough, there was a lot of harvest. Xianxia carried the bucket of dung and quickly ran back up the mountain. He dumped the harvest outside the wall into his own territory and quickly ran down the mountain. This round trip probably took nearly 2 hours. He carried 4 loads of dung. Seeing that the sky was already slightly bright, he finally stopped. Xianxia discovered that stealing dung from the female toilet in the middle of the night was a very exciting and very successful thing. He was actually a little excited. In the past he probably never thought that he would have such a day. If his subordinates from his previous life knew that Big Brother had done this, how would they feel? After the two of them had a successful cooperation, the distance between them gradually narrowed by a lot. In the next few days, Xianxia was pleasantly surprised to discover that Furong seemed to have an extraordinary interest in spiritual plants. She might be afraid of other things, but as long as it was related to spiritual plants, she wouldn't be afraid of anyone. She wouldn't be ashamed to ask questions. As long as it was a spiritual plant on Fuxian Island, she could recite its location and its various habits as if she was very familiar with it. He didn't expect this ugly girl to have this kind of ability. He had really picked up a treasure. Xianxia was secretly happy. A few days ago he saw a few familiar spiritual plants in the mulberry garden. They were precisely the spiritual plants required for the foundation building pill in the pill formula Jade archive. At that time his heart was thumping hard for a long time. A bold plan formed in his mind. He would think of a way to collect the seeds of these spiritual plants and plant them in the Golden Pearls space. Relying on the miraculous effect of the purple chaos, he believed that it wouldn't be long before he could produce a large amount of spiritual plants needed to concoct the foundation building pill. If he had an inexhaustible supply of spiritual plants on hand, he could definitely try to concoct the pill himself. However, what made him feel discouraged was that after carefully searching for a few days, there were only 5 types of spiritual plants required for the foundation building pill in the entire mulberry garden. He was still missing 4. There was no other way. He could only wait for the Fuxian Island to distribute the foundation building pill once every 3 years before attempting to build his foundation. Who would have thought that he would wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, and then find it by chance without even looking for it? After trying to ask, the ugly girl next to him unexpectedly knew where the other 4 types of spiritual plants could be found in the myriad fragrance garden. This was truly something worth being happy about. He didn't even consider whether he could get his hands on them or not. In his mind, there were only things that he didn't want or didn't know where. There was nothing that he couldn't get his hands on. Chapter 61. Everything was good in this world, but it didn't have the variety of entertainment in his previous world. At night it was even more torturous. Xianxia had been carrying it for a few years and had slowly gotten used to it. However, Furong's room didn't even have a single light source. He really didn't know how she had survived for so many years. There were a lot of fluorescent stones in the golden bead space. Initially he wanted to take a few out for illumination, but after thinking about it he decided against it. The light emitted by the fluorite was already a bit blue. He was afraid that if the light shone on Hibiscus's face, he would be so scared that he wouldn't be able to sleep. Tonight he climbed up to the roof and counted the stars. He looked at the small dark room under his butt and then looked at the other places where people lived. They were all brightly lit. It was really enviable, so he sighed and went back to his nest in the dark. He saw that Furong was still sitting cross-legged on the bed, cultivating. Unfortunately, he was restricted by the aura refining realm and was unable to cultivate. After thinking it over, he felt that he should ask her about the whereabouts of the spiritual herb tonight. With this girl's intelligence, she shouldn't suspect anything. Hiding under the blanket, he took out the jade disc containing the pill formula. He felt that it was still better to be safe than sorry. He had to confirm the spiritual herbs in the pill formula for the foundation establishment pill. He must not make a mistake. Infusing his spiritual sense into the jade plate, Zhou Xian soon found the recipe for the foundation establishment pill. Heart-guarding orchid, diamond fruit, tendon forging grass, ice spirit seed, gold fusion grass, 100-year ginseng, 100-year lingji, dirt removing grass, spirit gathering grass. If he remembered correctly, it was the 9-scented spirit grass. Who would have thought that the 100-year-old ginseng and reishi mushroom could also be considered as spiritual grasses? Only the first 5 species were found in the mulberry garden. Senior Aunt Farong. Yu Qianzhou kept the jade archive and called out to the other end of the tattered curtain. Hibiscus also stopped. Does our mulberry garden have 100-year-old ginseng and 100-year-old Ganoderma? Farong asked curiously. No, but these are the ones planted in the forest behind the mulberry garden. Not only are there 100-year ginseng, there are even close to 1,000-year-old ginseng. Some of the ginseng are probably about to turn into spirits. *CK, there's even the legendary 1,000-year-old ginseng. Yu Qianzhou was excited when he heard that. He sat up and said, there must be a lot. There are quite a few 100-year ones, but only a few 1,000-year ones. I heard that thing is very nutritious. Yu Qianzhou smiled and said, when I have time I'll get some to eat. Hibiscus chuckled a few times and said, ginseng and Ganoderma are common herbs even in the secular world. You don't need to spend much effort to grow them. Their rarity lies in their age. Usually, those that are over 100 years old can be included in the category of spiritual herbs. For us cultivators, eating ginseng and Ganoderma that are more than 100 years old directly is a waste. Refining them into pills is the best way to consume them. I'm just saying. Yu Qianzhou laughed mischievously and asked, does the mulberry garden have dirt-removing grass and spirit-gathering grass? There's none in the garden. The 2 biggest plots of land outside the garden at the foot of the mountain are planted with dirt-dispelling grass and spirit-gathering grass. Hibiscus paused for a moment, then explained, these 2 kinds of spiritual herbs are necessary for concocting medicinal pills. The dirt-dispelling grass could remove the impurities in the elixir, and the spirit-gathering grass could lock the elixir's spiritual qi and medicinal effects so that they wouldn't leak out. They were spirit herbs that were used in almost all elixirs. They were used in large quantities, so they were the most commonly planted spiritual herbs in the myriad fragrance garden. It turned out that there were spiritual herbs used to concoct foundation-building pills all around, but he didn't find them. It seemed that he had to walk around when he had time. Yu Qianzhou sighed and said, there are so many spiritual herbs in the myriad fragrance garden. You must have spent a lot of effort to collect them. Hibiscus replied, yes. In the outside world, our supporting Immortal's Island's disciples have been searching for all kinds of rare and precious spiritual herbs for a long time. After collecting different spiritual herbs, our myriad fragrance garden will cultivate seeds and then plant them in large quantities. For example, our mulberry garden's consecrated Jiugu is in charge of all kinds of spiritual herb seeds. As long as it's a spiritual herb in the myriad fragrance garden, she has seeds in her hands. Ma Jiugu has seeds of all kinds of spiritual herbs? Hearing this, Yu Qianzhou's heart jumped. He swallowed his saliva and asked, since she has so many seeds, why doesn't the mulberry garden have many kinds of spiritual herbs? Hibiscus explained, the mulberry garden is in charge of cultivating seeds of all kinds of spiritual herbs. It's not a place to plant large quantities of spiritual herbs. Only the more precious or rare spiritual herbs are planted in the mulberry garden. Yu Qianzhou didn't speak, but his mind was quickly turning. It was really troublesome that the seeds of spiritual herbs were in Ma Jiugu's hands. The key was that he didn't know her at all. Not to mention that old woman was at the late stage of crossing tribulation. It would be difficult to get something from her hands. Just thinking about it made his teeth hurt. Hibiscus wasn't someone who took the initiative to speak. Seeing Yu Qianzhou tossing and turning on the bed without saying anything, she naturally didn't say anything. But she didn't know that the latter was worrying about the seeds. She recalled the scene when she saw Ma Jiugu that day. Just a glance from her made her heart jump. She was really difficult to deal with. But that day Xianxia seemed to be very intimate with her. Strange, how could a new disciple like her be so familiar with Ma Jiugu? That's right, when I came out I heard her call out great-grandmother. Who was she calling? There were only a few people at that time. Apart from Ma Jiugu, who else could it be? The 2 of them were relatives. Yu Qianzhou woke up from the bed and sat up. If they weren't relatives, There was no reason for Majugu to be so intimate with Xianxia in this cold cultivation world. It couldn't be because she liked Xianxia's beauty. Yu Qianchou suddenly understood and slowly lay down again. His mind fell on Xianxia. Hibiscus didn't know what he was doing, so she got up and lay down in surprise. As the saying goes, hope is beautiful but reality is always cruel. Ever since Yu Qianchou arrived at the mulberry garden, he could be seen carrying a bucket of manure even before the sun rose. Such days passed. In order to get the seeds of spiritual herbs, he put his mind on Xianxia. He often wandered around the gate of the middle courtyard, hoping to meet her and make a connection. Unfortunately, he didn't get what he wanted. Several days passed, but Xianxia seemed to have disappeared from the mulberry garden. He didn't even see her shadow. The spiritual herbs in the formula of the foundation building pill in the mulberry garden were very tempting. Every time he passed by intentionally or unintentionally, he wanted to secretly pull a few. However, he found that there were eyes everywhere in the seemingly spacious environment, so he had no chance to do it. Later, he put his mind on the spiritual herb field at the foot of the mountain, but he also had no chance to do it. He ran to the woods in the back of the mountain to dig some 100-year-old ginseng and 100-year-old lingji, but before he entered the woods he was driven out and severely warned. After trying a few times, he didn't dare to try again. If he tried again, he would be suspected, so he could only wait for the opportunity to come. There was a secluded valley in Wanfenyuan, where there was a small river leading to the sea. There was a kind of silver-white fish in the river. After Yu Qianchou caught and ate it once, he found that the fish tasted exceptionally delicious. Since then he would come here to fish whenever he had time. From then on, the smell of grilled fish often wafted from the corners of the mulberry garden. After Furong ate his unique grilled fish, although she didn't say it, it was obvious that she liked it very much. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed and there was no sign of him going back to the Alchemy Pavilion. It was not a good thing to go back. The dead knot between him and Yanshu hadn't been untied. In this way, Yu Qianchou, who was waiting for an opportunity, lived a very regular life every day. Early in the morning he went to the women's toilet to pick feces. In the morning he fertilized the spiritual herbs, and in passing he tried his luck at the gate of the courtyard. In the afternoon he went fishing and came back to grill fish. Occasionally he would go back to the Golden Pearl and encourage Chen Feng to resume his old business and work hard to improve his talisman-making skills. Guan Yu also often asked him how he was doing in Fuxian Island, but he would never tell him the real situation even if he was beaten to death. After all, picking feces for a year was not a glorious thing. He didn't want anyone in the Golden Pearl to know about it. If it was spread out, it would be too damaging to his boss Yu's reputation. Day after day, when he was really depressed, he saw that there were many beautiful women in the mulberry garden. He also wanted to tease a younger sister or elder sister to relieve his boredom, but they didn't even have the interest to let him approach them. Late at night, Yu Qianchou hid under the quilt and cried sadly, "Brother is so lonely." Chapter 62. Under the hard work of Guan Yu and Chen Feng, large areas of the Golden Pearl were planted with fresh flowers. Looking around, it was like a sea of flowers, and the fragrance of fresh flowers permeated the air. The sea of flowers was surrounded by a forest, and from the bamboo house came the moving sound of a zither. Listening to the zither, the busy Guan Yu and Chen Feng seemed to be enjoying it very much. Standing in the sea of flowers, the white fox's white clothes fluttered. When she heard the sound of the zither, she raised her hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her delicate ear. She turned her head to look in the direction of the bamboo house, and a smile appeared on her beautiful face. For the past year, Yu Qianchou would take time to come to the Golden Pearl every day. Although he came with a smile every time, the white fox could see that he seemed to be hiding some bitterness in his heart. But when facing the three of them, he would always force a smile. In the bamboo pavilion on the zither platform, the white fox rarely played the seven-stringed zither, and it became his pastime. Every time he came, he would randomly play for a while. It should be the legendary playing the zither randomly, and the noise made by his playing made the other three feel unbearable pain. In the end, the white fox could not stand it anymore. Seeing that he was in a bad mood, she did not want to restrain him, so she decided to teach him personally. The white fox was a fox spirit who had played the zither for hundreds of years. and her zither skills were naturally superb. No matter how stupid Yu Qianqiu was, it was no problem for him to teach her. Day after day Yu Qianqiu's zither skills could not be said to be as superb as the white fox's, but he could definitely be regarded as a good player. In the past, this was something that Yu Qianqiu did not even dare to think about. Who could let him hold a 7-stringed log and practice the zither in peace? This might be the so-called misfortune, may be a blessing in disguise. When Yu Qianqiu played all kinds of beautiful songs that the white fox had never heard before, the white fox was secretly surprised at her little brother's musical talent. Unbeknownst to them, in the world that Yu Qianqiu lived in, the prosperity of music was not something that this world could compare to. The efficiency of the dissemination of music was something that people in this world did not even dare to think about. Yu Qianqiu had listened to it many times, so he had a clear mind. Furthermore, he had learned to play the zither from a good teacher, so he was naturally able to play it with ease. Every time a new song was played, White Fox's eyes would flash with amazement. Guan Yu and Qin Feng, who were busy in the flower bed, looked at each other. Previously, the two of them were already deeply shocked by Yu Qianqiu's profound knowledge in zoology and botany. They didn't expect their boss to be so talented in music as well. The two of them had also heard the 2 songs that the white fox had played over and over again, and they already felt that it was unprecedentedly beautiful. However, after Yu Qianqiu added the dubbing in music from the 2 songs that he remembered from his previous life, the two of them were intoxicated and White Fox was dumbfounded. The two of them said something that they did not dare to say in front of the White Fox, and that was that their boss was indeed their boss. After learning their master's zither skills, he immediately surpassed their master and played much better than Miss White. There was one time when Yu Qianqiu changed more than 10 songs in more than 2 hours. The style of the songs was not the slightest bit different, but the songs were still very moving. After he left, the white fox stood in the sea of flowers with a pale face and stared in the direction of the bamboo house. She stood there for an entire night, carefully recalling every song. After recalling, her mouth was full of bitterness. She had played the zither for hundreds of years, and she thought that few people could compare with her attainments in zither music. However, she did not expect that she could not compare with her brother, who had only practiced the zither for a year. Who would believe it if she said it? But she believed that Yu Qianqiu, who had taught her step by step, naturally knew that her brother really knew nothing about playing the zither before. Although his zither skills were a little worse, who could compare with his musical sense and attainments in zither music? Yu Qianqiu, who was holding the zither to vent his emotions in the bamboo pavilion, had no idea that he had shocked the 3 of them during this time. After the song, he also disappeared. He staggered back to the mulberry garden. At the door of the utility room, Furong was waiting for him with a shoulder pole and a dung ladle, guarding 2 buckets of dung, and he was already used to it. Yu Qianqiu shook his head and smiled in surprise. What had he done in the past year? He could not steal the spirit herbs, nor could he get the seeds. He could not even get his sister in the mulberry garden, let alone the plan to get the seeds from Xianxia. She had never seen her before. He often carried out the spirit of AQ and comforted himself. It's not that I'm incompetent, it's just that the people in the cultivation world are too abnormal. If the things were in the hands of ordinary people, I would have gotten them long ago. Although he said so, in fact he was quite shocked. He had doubts about the ability of his former and current boss. Martial Uncle Furong, I made you wait for a long time again. Yu Qianqiu took the shoulder pole with a smile, hung the buckets on it, put it on his shoulder and walked out of the courtyard. Furong said, no. She followed him with 2 dung ladles, one long and one short. The short one was made by Furong herself, saying that it was convenient to fertilize. These 2 were the most unconventional combination of the mulberry garden. They went to the dung pit outside the wall one after the other, filled it with fertilizer and carried the pole back. There were more than a dozen spirit herb fields in the mulberry garden. Fertilizing the roots of each spirit herb needed to be watered a little, no more, no less. After all, spirit herbs were not cabbages, so it was a test of experience. A spirit herb field needed about a bucket of fertilizer. Yu Qianqiu had to carry it several times every day, and he basically spent half a day here. Qingqiao, I heard that the foundation building pills will be issued in 10 days. Yes, Senior Marshal Sister Lulu, I'm so nervous. I'm really afraid that I won't be able to successfully build my foundation. Don't worry. People like us who are selected to join the Mulberry Garden have good aptitudes in Wanfen Garden. We'll definitely succeed in building our foundation on the first try. They were going to issue the foundation building pills? Yu Qianqiu immediately stopped what he was doing, turned his head to look at the two young girls who were pulling weeds in the neighboring field, and pricked up his ears to listen. That's true. The disciples selected to join the Mulberry Garden are all top-notch in Wanfen Garden. I don't think I've heard of any seniors in the garden who have succeeded in building their foundation more than twice. And if we really can't succeed, we'll just wait for another 3 years. We have 3 chances, so there won't be any problems. After the two young girls comforted each other, they laughed and changed the topic and began to talk about who was the most beautiful. Yu Qianqiu was startled. His heart was beating fast from their words, but they didn't say anything. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Damn it, it's none of your business whether other people are beautiful or not. Why are all women like this? After patiently tending to a field, he couldn't hold back anymore. He put down the things in his hands and with a face full of smiles, he walked towards the spirit herb field next door. So it's the two beautiful senior martial sisters, Qingqiao and Lulu. Yu Qianqiu laughed coquettishly. The two girls who were squatting and pulling grass heard him and looked over. When they saw Yu Qianqiu walking over, they both stood up. Seemed like they were familiar with him. Yu Qianqiu, don't come any closer. Qingqiao frowned and her tone was very unfriendly. No hurry, hee hee. Yu Qianqiu laughed and said, I just want to ask these two senior martial sisters a few questions. After I'm done, I'll leave immediately. Seeing him continue to walk over, the two girls pinched their noses and took a step back. Lulu shouted, Yu Qianqiu, if you come any closer, we won't be polite anymore. Yu Qianqiu raised his arm and sniffed his sleeve and said sincerely, I put medicine on it so it really doesn't stink at all. If you don't believe me, you can smell it. As he said that, he extended his arm towards the two girls. Senior martial sister, let's go. Don't mind him. Qingqiao pulled Lulu and said, and the latter nodded. Just like that, the two girls left with a look of deep hatred. Faster, thief. Yu Qianqiu sniffed his body again, and after confirming that there was no smell, he said indignantly, didn't the things I picked out by the two of you? Why are you hiding? Damn it. If you're so capable, come and poop. Chapter 63. After encountering too many annoying things, scolding would naturally dissipate and he wouldn't take it to heart. But the foundation building pill was a big deal for him. After staying in the Mulberry Garden for so long, he actually didn't know that the foundation building pill was going to be distributed. Looking at Furong, who was attentively fertilizing the spiritual herbs, he really couldn't feel happy. Martial Aunt Furong, isn't the foundation building pill distributed once every 3 years? Yu Qianqiu asked expressionlessly. Furong held a short manure ladle, thought for a moment, then nodded and said, this year seems to be the 3rd year. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. Asking her was also a waste of time. Her world seemed to have no other things, it was too pure and simple. But thinking about it, what Qingqiao and Lulu said should be true. Would he have a chance to build his foundation soon? Would he be able to build his foundation successfully? Regardless of whether he could succeed or not, having a chance was better than not having a chance. Unfortunately, there was only one foundation building pill each time. Shadian Guanyu Qinfeng, I'm sorry. Don't worry, this boss will definitely do what he promised you. Thinking of this, Yu Qianqiu's depression that had accumulated for more than a year was swept away. He faintly became excited and his work speed was clearly a lot faster. He urgently wanted to find someone to ask when the foundation building pill would be distributed. After finishing his work, he threw the things to Furong to deal with. He wandered around the Mulberry Garden wanting to get close to people and ask about them when he saw them, but the attitude of the people here was similar to Qingqiao and Lulu. He had no choice but to leave the Mulberry Garden. In the end, he, the only man who carried manure in Wanfen Garden, was too famous. No matter who he found, they were afraid of him, and he was almost beaten by beautiful women several times. Yu Qianqiu, don't you know that disciples who haven't reached the foundation building stage are not allowed to wander around the garden? A middle-aged woman at the entrance of Wanfen Garden stopped him. Martial ancestor, I was originally a disciple on loan from the Alchemy Pavilion. I have to go back to the Alchemy Pavilion to do something. It won't be long before I return. Yu Qianzhou saw that he really couldn't ask anything in Wanfen Garden, so he wanted to go back to the Alchemy Pavilion to ask Ling Feng and the others. No, the lady refused without hesitation. Grandmaster, then do you know when the foundation building dawn for us Qi condensation disciples will be distributed? I don't know. Yu Qianzhou, don't come any closer. Go back or else don't blame me for being rude. The middle-aged woman pulled out the sword in her hand and shouted at Yu Qianzhou with a disgusted expression. His face twitched and he showed signs of anger, but when he saw the shining long sword in front of him, he knew that a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. He could only grit his teeth and retreat. Unable to ask about the foundation building pill, he ran into a wall everywhere and suffered a bellyful of anger. Yu Qianzhou went to the riverside alone and decided to fish to relieve his boredom. He took out the fishing gear he made from under a rock. But strangely, it seemed that his bad mood also affected the mood of the fish in the river. Not a single fish took the bait. As a result, the more he fished, the angrier he became. He retracted the fishing rod and threw it back. Hibiscus said that this river leads to the sea. Since there are people guarding Wanfen Garden, there shouldn't be anyone stopping me from going to the seaside, right? Yu Qianzhou muttered as he looked at the river that stretched between the mountains. Unknowingly, he followed the direction of the river. After walking along the weeds by the river for more than 2 hours, the river in front of him passed through 2 dark, barren mountains. He could already smell the salty smell in the air. Yu Qianzhou thought to himself, I'm afraid I'm already at the mouth of the sea. Sure enough, when he reached the mountains, he could already hear the sound of waves beating against the shore, mixed with the cries of seabirds. He quickened his pace and passed through the mountains. His eyes suddenly opened up. The river rushed to its end, the sea. The blue sea was surging and the white sandy beach was smooth and clean as the waves rose and fell. A flock of seagulls flew between the sea and the sky, and the 2 barren mountains behind him seemed to be where they built their nests. He hadn't seen the sea for a long time. The endless sea was so wide. The scenery in front of him made Yu Qianzhou feel refreshed, and all his troubles were forgotten. Ayo! Ayo! Yu Qianzhou took off his shoes and socks and rushed forward barefooted, leaving a row of footprints on the flat beach. His cries immediately startled a flock of seagulls on the rocks behind him, and they also echoed his cries. Yu Qianzhou waved his fists at them flying in the air and laughed loudly. However, he didn't notice that a person walked out of a cliff cave behind him and was staring at him. It was none other than Xianxia, whom he hadn't seen for more than a year. Like a child, Yu Qianzhou, who was happily playing at the seaside, only stopped after a long time. He stared at the vast sea and opened his arms as if he wanted to embrace the entire sea. Suddenly he shouted, this scene should be sung to express our will." With a somersault he somersaulted out of the seawater and landed on the clean beach, sitting cross-legged. With a wave of his hand he placed a 7-stringed zither on his knees. Yu Qianzhou brewed a little and immediately he let out an unrestrained laugh. A familiar melody sung by Rin Xinqi from his previous life appeared in his mind, just in line with the current situation and mood. Xianxia, who was on the cliff cave, stared at the person below and murmured, "It's Yu Qianzhou. Is he going to sing? I've seen the secret report from Hundred Flowers Palace that the world-famous white fox and dream of mandarin ducks and butterflies were actually created by an unranked disciple of Ong Kuang-tsung. That person seems to be called Yu Qianzhou. I've admired him for a long time, but it's a pity that I can't meet him. I wonder if this Yu Qianzhou is the same Yu Qianzhou? I'll wait and see." After laughing, Yu Qianzhou raised his hand and waved. His fingers made a sound on the zither. His mood was surging and he unconsciously used his true qi. The sound of the zither pierced through the sound of crashing waves and spread in all directions. His 10 fingers had already skillfully plucked the strings of the zither. The dong. The moving prelude gradually sounded. Hearing this prelude, Xianxia's eyes were already a little brighter. Suddenly Yu Qianzhou burst into another wave of laughter. Accompanied by the sound of the zither, he opened his mouth and sang loudly towards the boundless sea. The blue sea laughs, the surging tides on both sides, floating and sinking with the waves, remembering the present. The heavens laughs, one after another. The heavens know who wins and who loses. The rivers and mountains laugh, the distant misty rain, the waves wash away the mortal world. How many do you know in the secular world? The cool breeze laughs, actually provoking loneliness. The lofty sentiments still remain in the evening. Thaw thaw. The wild voice in the hoarse voice, the wild singing, the lofty sentiments in the song and the laughter of the common people. Facing the sea, laughing at the world, laughing at the common people, laughing at the sea, laughing at the world, laughing at the common people. Everything was in this song. This kind of lofty and unrestrained song was completely different from White Fox and Dream of Mandarin Ducks and Butterflies. When Xianxia heard it, even as a woman, her whole body trembled. Was the person in front of her that ordinary-looking little disciple of the alchemy pavilion that she had seen before? The scene of seeing Yu Qianqiu for the first time emerged in her mind. A trace of a smile appeared at the corner of Xianxia's mouth. 100 Flowers Palace's secret report said that Yu Qianqiu doesn't care about fame and fortune, and is willing to hide with the reputation of being a waste. The example in the report is very similar to this Yu Qianqiu in front of me. With such talent, he is actually willing to carry manure and fertilize the mulberry garden day after day. He really is a person with shocking talent who has seen through the affairs of the world. If this Yu Qianqiu isn't that Yu Qianqiu, who else can it be? Is there a second Yu Qianqiu with such talent in the world? I don't believe it. If Yu Qianqiu heard her words, he would definitely hug her thigh and cry bitterly. He would definitely tell her, I really don't want to carry manure in the mulberry garden. I really don't have a choice. Big sister, please save me. Chapter 64. His 10 fingers skillfully pressed, plucked, swept, plucked and strummed the 7 strings. The sound of the guqin was sometimes impassioned and sometimes more intense. Accompanied by his la-la-la harmonies, it could make one forget all the unhappiness and troubles in one's heart. At this moment one did not need to be troubled. One only needed to be influenced by him and laugh while facing the sea with him. Even the sea seemed to be influenced by his song and the sound of the guqin. The waves were sometimes turbulent and sometimes calm. The seagulls flying above the sea also increasingly ignored the turbulence of the sea and dared to pass through the surging waves. Xianxia's eyes were a little dazed and intoxicated. Suddenly the sound of the guqin changed. Yu Qianqiu sang again. The sea laughs, the surging tides on both sides, floating and sinking with the waves, remembering today. The heavens laughs, one after another. Who wins and who loses, the heavens know. The rivers and mountains laugh, the misty rain is far away, the waves wash away the mortal world. How many do you know? The common people laugh, no longer lonely, the lofty sentiments are still there, laughing foolishly. La 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 la. Yu Qianqiu repeated the song over and over again. His 10 fingers waved freely as if he wanted to vent all the unhappiness of the past year. Fortunately, the white fox was not here. If she knew that she had missed out on such a good song by her brother, she would definitely regret it. The eyes on the cliff stared at the back of the free and unrestrained lofty sentiments, becoming more and more blurred. A strand of longing in her heart, which had been sealed for many years, finally saw the light of day today. It was hooked by the song and wrapped around the back of the figure. It was tightly tied and could not be untied. Many years later, this back was something she could not forget. Yu Qianqiu's unintentional action was really fate. I wonder what the name of this song is? Xianxia savored the meaning of the lyrics and murmured, the ocean laughs, the heavens laughs, the rivers and mountains laugh, the breeze laughs and the common people laugh. You have so many funny things, but who will laugh with me? Floating and sinking with the waves, only remembering today? I remember the present, but can you remember the me of the present? The misty rain is far away, the waves wash away the mortal world. How many do you know? What do you remember? Can you tell me? How dare you provoke loneliness? Who made you miss? Not me. No longer lonely? Do you have someone in your heart? Not me. The lofty sentiments are still there, smiling foolishly? You're quite optimistic, but I'm afraid I can't. She was talking to herself, but she did not know that just a step behind her, Majugu, who was leaning on her walking stick, was listening with a smile on her face. She was looking at her kindly, and from time to time she would look at the carefree Yu Qianqiu. Majugu was also attracted by Yu Qianqiu's zither music and singing. Who told Yu Qianqiu to forget himself for a moment? The more he played, the more excited he became. His Xianxia surged all over his body as he played and sang, and his voice traveled far. Then again, Ma Jiugu had to admit that after living for hundreds of years, this was the first time she had heard such a wonderful song. She also had to admit that she had misjudged Yu Qianqiu the first time she saw him. She didn't expect that there was such a great peerless talent hiding in her mulberry garden. What a surprise. It's a pity that such a gifted scholar has to carry feces, but he's a good fit for my sieur to be her husband. Thinking of this, Ma Jiugu thought to herself, Xia, don't you want to know the name of that song? Granny will help you figure it out. You don't have to worry that he won't remember you today. Great-grandmother will let him remember you today. Although she was old, she lifted the walking stick in her hand and fiercely poked it on the rock. She shouted in a loud voice, "Which child is it that doesn't know death and is making a ruckus here? Aren't you afraid that I will take your life?" As expected of a consecrator of the supporting Immortal Island, his cultivation was indeed profound. With just a casual shout, the sound it emitted was able to suppress the sound of the waves and Yu Qianqiu's playing. Xianxia was shocked and quickly turned around. When she saw her great-grandmother's angry expression, she couldn't help but turn pale in fright. She thought to herself, when did great-grandmother come? Did she hear what I said just now? Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Why was there someone else here? The sound of the zither came to an abrupt stop. He quickly stored it into his storage pouch and leaped up. He finally noticed the two people on the cliff behind him. Isn't that Ma Jiugu and Xianxia? Why are they here? It's over. That old woman seems to be very angry. What should I do? Not many people can withstand the wrath of an old monster like her. Damn it. I'm afraid of birds. If worse comes to worst, I'll leave. It's just a pity for the Foundation establishment pill, but my life is still more important. A series of thoughts flashed in his mind. After analyzing the situation, Yu Qianqiu respectfully bowed and said, "Disciple Yu Qianqiu greets Consecrator Jiugu." Disciple was presumptuous and didn't know that Consecrator Jiugu was here. Otherwise, Disciple would never dare to disturb Consecrator Jiugu. When Xianxia heard this, a thought flashed in her mind. Fortunately, you didn't know. Otherwise, would you still come here and sing? Humph. Ma Jiugu snorted with a frosty expression. Her voice echoed on the beach and the cliff for a long time. Yu Qianqiu secretly thought that she was very powerful. He quickly bowed and said, "Please forgive me, Consecrator Jiugu. Disciple knows his mistake. I'll go back now. I won't dare to disturb you again." After saying that, he quickly ran to pick up his shoes and socks and put them on before running away. A trace of disappointment flashed in Xianxia's eyes, but it was all seen by Ma Jiugu. She thought to herself, Xia really likes him. Did I say you can go? Ma Jiugu pointed her walking stick and shouted coldly. Yu Qianqiu, who had just run a few steps, suddenly stopped and didn't dare to run anymore. He knew that it was better to be obedient now. If he angered her, even if he escaped back to the Golden Pearl, he would never be able to return to supporting Immortal Island. He would also never be able to obtain the Foundation establishment pill again. He could only obediently come back and salute. Disciple obeys Consecrator Jiugu's instructions. Ma Jiugu poked the ground with her walking stick and said coldly, "I don't like to talk to people from so far away. Come up, I have something to ask you." Yes. A trace of joy flashed in Xianxia's eyes. Ma Jiugu saw it but pretended not to see it. "Hey, old woman. Don't you know how to come down? It's so high that I'll have to climb up." Yu Qianqiu didn't dare to say it out loud. He looked at the nearly 10-meter-high cliff cave and obediently climbed up. Although his cultivation wasn't high, climbing a mountain was a piece of cake. As soon as Yu Qianqiu reached the cave entrance, he felt a wave of heat coming at him. He didn't think too much and immediately saluted, "Consecrator Jiugu, Martial Uncle Yan." Xianxia nodded and smiled at him. Ma Jiugu poked the ground with her walking stick and turned around saying, "Come with me." Yu Qianqiu didn't know what she was going to do, so he vigilantly looked around. No wonder the two suddenly appeared on the cliff. Turned out to be a cave. He didn't know where it led to, so he had no choice but to follow them inside. The cave walls were inlaid with fluorescent stones to illuminate the path downward. Yu Qianqiu could feel the three of them heading downward. Not long after, he saw a red light flashing at a bend in the cave wall ahead, and the temperature was getting higher. Just as he was wondering where the two of them were taking him, a wave of heat came rushing at him as soon as he turned the corner. What he saw in front of him shocked him. The three of them were on a stone bridge that wasn't very wide. Deep under the bridge, a red liquid was surging like boiling water and red bubbles were popping up and popping. Xianxia exclaimed, "Volcanic magma." Chapter 65. Huh. Ma Jiugu, who was walking in front, stopped and turned around. Most people call it fire dragon, but very few people know that it's called volcano lava. It seems that you're quite knowledgeable. You actually know what it is. Xianxia gave him a meaningful look. Xianxia shook his head and smiled bitterly. It's nothing. I've only heard about it before. Ma Jiugu grunted and continued walking forward. This was his first time walking on a volcano's lava. He felt like he had seen it in a movie. Suddenly he recalled that the color of the rocks on the peak of Alchemy Pavilion was the same as the rocks outside. Moreover, the temperature on the mountain was very high. Needless to say, Alchemy Pavilion was definitely built on top of a volcano. If his guess was correct, this so-called supporting Immortal island was probably just a volcanic island. When he thought of this, he jumped in fright. Oh my god. Volcanoes were no laughing matter. There was no scientific warning system in this era. If one were to erupt, everyone would be finished. Looking at the lava below, it was still relatively calm. Clearly there wasn't any explosive energy. However, this thing was really hard to explain. It seemed that after successfully building his foundation, he would have to leave as soon as possible. He didn't want to be poked into the sky by a volcano one day. At the end of the stone bridge was a large stone room. From the chisel marks around it, it was obvious that it had been excavated by humans. In the middle of the room was a large pit that sunk into the ground. At the eye of the pit was a large copper furnace that was roughly as tall as a person. Smoke was rising from the top of the furnace, and he could smell the fragrance of medicinal pills. A faint flame was emitted from the bottom of the furnace, illuminating the ground red. Immediately, a thought emerged in Xianxia's mind. This was alchemy. Using the volcano's earthly fire to refine pills was a good idea. Not only was the fire huge, but there was also no need to use firewood. It was no wonder that Alchemy Pavilion was built on top of a volcano. According to the records on the Jade Archive, the three true flames were the first to be used in alchemy. However, this was only a legend. Next was the natal true flames. Only those with extremely high cultivations possessed them. However, using them to refine pills consumed a lot of vitality. Next was the heavenly flames. He didn't know what a heavenly flame was, but he knew that earthly fire referred to a volcano's fire. Lastly was the ordinary firewood. Why did Ma Jiugu bring me here? Xianxia couldn't figure it out. The three of them walked down the stairs to the bottom of the pit. Xianxia suddenly felt a little unbearable. The temperature was too high. Even with his cultivation, it seemed like he couldn't handle it. To be exact, it was a little scalding. After a while, seeing that Ma Jiugu still didn't say anything, he had the urge to run away. If he stayed any longer, he would be roasted into human jerky. We still lack an assistant. Are you willing to come? Ma Jiugu, who was standing in front of the furnace, finally spoke. Xianxia seemed to be in a daze from the roasting and felt a little drowsy. His ears were ringing and he couldn't hear what she said at all. Ma Jiugu was startled. She turned around and saw his situation. She immediately shouted, "Why aren't you circulating your cultivation to resist? Do you want to die with your cultivation?" Xianxia was thinking about the meaning of her great-grandmother's words. She turned around and also saw that his situation was not good. She showed a trace of anxiety. Shocked by Ma Jiugu's shout, Xianxia woke up. He circulated his zhenqi and did his best to disperse the heat in his body. His somewhat sluggish and red eyes became lively again, but he still felt hot. He thought to himself, this is more enjoyable than a sauna. Seeing that he was awake, Ma Jiugu repeated her words. We still lack an assistant. Are you willing to come? I'm willing. Of course I'm willing. This was his dream. How could he not be willing? At least it was better than carrying dung all day long. After a moment of joy, he frowned and said, I'm afraid that Elder Fei won't agree. You don't have to worry about Ferdinand. Ma Jiugu looked at the furnace that was getting more and more fragrant and said, this furnace is done. She tapped the top of the furnace with her walking stick and the lid popped open. A rich fragrance spread in all directions. Dozens of black shadows came out of the furnace. Ma Jigu gently waved her sleeve and absorbed the black shadows. She then put them into the storage pouch on her waist. His crutch tapped the ground again, producing a metallic sound. The bottom of the pill furnace darkened and in an instant there was no more flame. Xianxia could feel the temperature slowly dropping. He couldn't help but feel surprised. There must be some kind of mechanism installed below. It was really a good place for alchemy. Ma Jigu turned around and said to Xianxia, "He will be your assistant in the future." Then she staggered up the stairs. Xianxia was stunned and blushed. She understood that her great-grandmother might have heard her words and wanted to help her. She stole a glance at Xianxia. The latter looked at Ma Jigu and sighed inwardly. If he didn't know better, he wouldn't know that this person who couldn't even walk steadily was actually a late-stage tribulation-passing cultivator. Suddenly Ma Jigu turned around and asked, "Boy, I want to ask you something. What's the name of the song you were shouting outside?" Xianxia scratched his head in embarrassment and said, "I just sang it casually. Let's call it Ocean's Laugh." Ma Jigu turned around and shook her head. "Laugh, laugh." "I'm old and can't laugh anymore. I'll leave it to you young people. Alas, it's good to be young." After watching the old woman leave, Xianxia nodded and bowed to Xianxia. "Martial Antien." Xianxia chuckled at his flattering appearance and thought that this person's acting was quite good. He was already exposed, so why was he still pretending? She rolled her eyes and asked, "Yuqian, I have a question for you. Do you know him?" Xianxia was puzzled, but he still replied respectfully, "Martial Ant, please ask. Xianxia will tell you everything he knows." "It's good." Xianxia walked gracefully and said slowly, "In recent years 2 songs have been sung in the cultivation world. One is called White Fox, and the other is called Mandarin Duck and Butterfly Dream. I heard that they were composed by a disciple of Ong Tsung. That person's name seems to be Xianxia. Do you know him?" Xianxia's expression changed, but he immediately returned to normal. He couldn't let anyone else know about this matter. Otherwise, Fuxian Island would treat him as a spy sent by Ong Tsung, which was one of the biggest taboos in the cultivation world. He shook his head without hesitation and said, "I don't know him and I've never heard of those 2 songs. I didn't expect that there would be someone with the same name as me. I guess Martial Ant must have seen him before. What does he look like?" "Of course I have." Xianxia stared at him with a playful smile and said, "Not only have I seen him, but I've also talked to him. I've also heard him play the guqin and sing at the seaside. The strangest thing is that he looks exactly like you." Xianxia's heart was beating wildly. Her words were too obvious. She was obviously talking about him, but he had never seen her when he was in Ong Tsung. It was very likely that she was lying to him. He said in surprise, "There is actually someone in this world who looks so much like me. Not only do we have the same name, but we also look exactly the same. Martial Ant, if there is a chance, you must take me to see him. He may be my relative." Xianxia was stunned. She almost said that he was Ong Tsung's Xianxia. She didn't expect that she had made it so obvious, but he still pretended that he didn't know. He was really thick-skinned. After thinking for a while, she understood. His disciple was not expelled from the sect and he secretly joined another sect. Anyone would treat him as a spy. This was a taboo in the cultivation world. He would lose his life. He asked too rashly. Xianxia didn't say anything more. She said, "If you don't know him, then forget it. Let's go back to the mulberry garden." Chapter 66. Both of them had their own thoughts and were silent along the way. Xianxia thought about it carefully and was basically sure that she already knew about him. He didn't know why the grandmother and granddaughter brought him to their side. He thought about all kinds of possibilities and had a headache, but he didn't expect Xianxia to fall in love with him. This man was sometimes like this. He was too clever and couldn't see the essence of things. Maybe the person involved was confused. After saying those words, Xianxia regretted it to death. From Xianxia's careful and respectful tone, she could tell that he had already become estranged from her. It was as if he was constantly on guard against her, as if she would harm him. She wanted to explain, but she was afraid that the more she explained, the deeper the misunderstanding would be. She could only slowly taste the bitterness in her mouth. Yu Qianqiu finally knew why he didn't see Xianxia come out for more than a year. It turned out that she never went in and out of the mulberry garden's front door. As she entered the courtyard, they came to the most mysterious house in the mulberry garden. Looking at the furnishings in the house carefully, he couldn't see anything special. The whole house was made of wood and felt very ordinary. At most, the wood used to build the house was old trees. But there was a smell that couldn't be described. In other words, it was spiritual energy. Ma Jiugu had returned long ago. She was lying on a rocking chair and chatting with Elder Lan next to her. Elder Lan was truly a beautiful and dignified young married woman. Her figure was truly indescribable. She was voluptuous with a protruding front and a curvaceous back. Her skin was so delicate and white that it could be pinched with a pinch of water. Her face and temperament were also indescribable. In Yu Qianqiu's words, she was the best among young married women. Especially her body was always covered with a layer of light, which made people feel that she was a fairy. Such a beauty, but unfortunately she was Ferdinand's wife. Elder Lan turned her head and glanced at the two of them with a smile. He was slightly stunned. It seemed that she didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to come with Xianxia. She was a little surprised and said, "Xie, are you?" Her eyes fell on Yu Qianqiu. Ma Jiugu, who was sitting on the rocking chair, said, "Last Lan, leave Yu Qianqiu to Xie to assist him. There's no need for him to take care of the spiritual plants. Go and tell Ferdinand." "Jiugu, it's fine as long as you agree. What else do you need to tell him?" Elder Lan said. "Lan girl, Wan Finyuan belongs to Ferdinand. The rules can't be ignored." "I know." Elder Lan stood up and glanced at the two of them. He was startled to see Xianxia's blushing face. Then he realized something and looked at Yu Qianqiu with a smile. "Yu Qianqiu, you can move into the inner courtyard from now on. It's more convenient this way." As he spoke, he glanced at Xianxia, who was avoiding his gaze. "Move in." An image of a disfigured face and a frail figure flashed through Yu Qianqiu's mind, and his heart clenched for no reason. He didn't understand the grandmother and granddaughter's intention. He felt that moving in might not be a good thing. He immediately refused. "Elder Lan, I'm used to living with Uncle Ferong. You don't need to trouble yourself. I'll live there." The three women all stared at him at the same time. "Ferong?" Elder Lan's face sank. She said coldly, "What? You don't listen to me because of that ugly monster?" A wave of cold air that was visible to the naked eye assaulted Yu Qianqiu, forcing him to take a step back. He immediately felt a bone-chilling cold all over his body, causing him to shiver. "Lan girl." "Aunt Lan." Xianxia stood in front of Elder Lan. She couldn't help but shiver when she touched the white cold air. She said after the cold air went back, "Aunt Lan, forget it. Don't force him. It's the same whether he lives outside or inside." Elder Lan coldly snorted and turned her body to the side. She gave face to the grandmother and granddaughter. Seeing the awkward situation, Xianxia said to Yu Qianqiu, "You go back first. I'll find you if there's anything." Yu Qianqiu nodded and bowed to the three. When he walked past the well at the entrance of the courtyard, he couldn't help but shiver. He found that the cold air from the well was similar to Elder Lan's. He couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile. It wasn't worth it to offend an expert just because of a disagreement. After returning and seeing Ferong, Yu Qianqiu had something he couldn't figure out. It wasn't just about today's matter. This Elder Lan was all smiles to everyone in the mulberry garden except for Ferong. As long as she saw Ferong, her pretty face would immediately freeze. Ferong also seemed to be very afraid of her. It was like a cat and a mouse. He told Ferong about his transfer. There wasn't any surprise on her face. It was as if everything that happened to him was expected. Early in the morning, Yu Qianqiu still had to carry a pole and work. Ferong said that since he had been transferred, he didn't need to do it anymore. Unfortunately, she couldn't change his mind. But he didn't have time to do the work of fertilizing. Xianxia came to find him. He looked at their living environment and saw that there was only a tattered curtain between their beds. He couldn't help but frown. After seeing Ferong's appearance, he was silent for a while and didn't say anything. After working for Xianxia for a few days, he found that there was nothing to do. She didn't need his help at all. He was just accompanying her. He finally understood that Xianxia came to the volcano cave every day to learn alchemy. However, he also benefited from it. He had learned most of Xiaxia's craftsmanship. The only thing he needed was some time to practice. If there was anything he didn't understand, as long as he asked, Xianxia would be happy to answer him. This was exactly what he dreamed of. He was happy to follow her every day. There was nothing to be unhappy about. Today Mulberry Garden sent out a notice. All aura refining disciples were to gather in the inner garden. The foundation building pills were distributed to everyone. Xianxia happily ran to the inner garden. He stood in a row with 7 beautiful aura refining beauties. The 8 of them couldn't hide their excitement. Opposite them, Xianxia and Ma Jiugu stood under the eaves with the help of a walking stick. Both of them looked at Xianxia and smiled. Xianxia smiled happily. He had been looking forward to this day for several years. How could he not be happy? Elder Lan smiled amiably and said, "Today is a good day. Everyone, don't be excited. Wait a moment, the foundation building pills will be delivered soon." The 8 of them bowed together and said, "Thank you for the sect's help. Thank you, consecrated Jiugu. Thank you, Elder Lan. If our cultivation is successful in the future, we will definitely work hard for the sect." These were some old words. Everyone had memorized them before they came. But at this time their gratitude was real, including Xianxia. In short, everyone laughed very happily. Everyone was very happy. Looking at this scene, Xianxia sighed. A big sect was really a big sect. How many disciples in Fuxian Island had not reached the foundation building stage? It was definitely not a small number. The number of foundation building pills they took out at once was not a small number. Back in the day, even a large sect like the Azure Light School would only be able to obtain a limited amount of foundation establishment dawn through the New Excellence Assembly that was held once every 10 years. Moreover, not all of the disciples in the school had the opportunity to obtain one, and some disciples would not even have the luck to obtain one until they were old. How could it be like the supporting Immortal Island? It had its own spiritual herb garden and could refine pills. Furthermore, every 3 years the entire island would be able to refine pills. This was strength. Sure enough, not long after, someone delivered the foundation building pills. Fei Dinan came with a box personally with a smile. The 8 of them bowed together and said, "Greetings, Elder Fei." Fei Dinan walked to Elder Lan's side and waved. He said happily, "Today is a good day for everyone. No need to be so polite." He glanced at everyone with a smile. His gaze paused on Xianxia and the latter smiled at him respectfully. Fei Dinan was startled. He looked at Xianxia and then looked at the box in his hand. He could not smile anymore. Elder Lan, who was beside him, grabbed the box in his hand and rolled her eyes at him. She said coquettishly, "Why are you in a daze? The disciples have been waiting anxiously." Chapter 67. The 8 of them stared at the slowly opening wooden box in Elder Lan's hand and immediately smelled a fragrance. Their eyes couldn't help but show a look of anticipation. Elder Lan stretched out 2 slender fingers and smiled as she took out a foundation building pill the size of a purple quail. She placed it under her nose and sniffed it. She looked at the crowd and said with a smile, "It smells so good." Everyone laughed along with him. Elder Lan put the foundation building pill back into the box. Just as she was about to look up, she suddenly paused and looked into the box in disbelief. Then she glanced at the 8 people standing opposite her with a look of confirmation. "Ferdinand, what's going on? Why are there only 7? Where's the last one? Did you eat it?" Elder Lan asked her husband unhappily as she held the box in her hands. For a moment, everyone who was in high spirits just now quietened down. Especially the 8 disciples, they were even more anxious. What did one less mean? It meant that someone might not get it. When he saw Ferdinand's eyes looking at him, Xianxia's heart was beating fast. He thought to himself, "Oh no, that missing one isn't for me, right?" He was not the only one who was nervous. The other 7 female disciples were also very nervous. That, indeed, I missed one person to the sect. Ferdinand smiled and pointed to someone and said, "I forgot about Xianxia." "What?" Xianxia cried out in surprise. and he instantly felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. His head buzzed and his countenance instantly turned ghastly pale. He shook his head with great effort to stabilize himself. Elder Lan's face immediately turned cold. She said in a cold tone, "Ferdinand, what do you mean? You got the person from the elixir refining pavilion. What? You threw him to the mulberry garden and left him alone? Could it be that you look down on our mulberry garden so much?" The other 7 female disciples heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Xianxia with pity in their eyes. "Lan girl, don't be anxious. Let Ferdinand explain clearly what's going on." Yan Zixia walked over while supporting Majiogu. The former saw that Xianxia's face did not look good and could not help but show a trace of worry on her face. Am I being wronged? He had personally delivered the medicine, which meant that he looked down on the mulberry garden. However, that brat was borrowed from the Alchemy Pavilion and is not considered a true disciple of my myriad fragrance garden. I forgot to report him. Right, the Alchemy Pavilion. Thinking up to here, Ferdinand suddenly came to a realization. He bowed to Majugu and said, "Jugu Bingshir indeed misunderstood me. Think about it. Xianxia is actually a disciple of the Alchemy Pavilion. How can I report him under the name of Wanfen Garden? Don't worry. The Alchemy Pavilion definitely has him. Even if they don't, they can only blame themselves. Just let them refine another batch." "I see, Dinan is right." Majugu nodded and said to Xianxia, "You don't have to worry, you will get what belongs to you." Xianxia also heaved a sigh of relief, but he still felt a little uneasy before he confirmed what he had obtained. He squeezed out a smile and said, "With you in charge, disciple is not in a hurry." "Bingxia, you see, you misunderstood me," Ferdinand said in a wrong tone. Lan Bingxia rolled her eyes at him and sneered, "Who told you not to make it clear?" After that, she held the box in her hand and distributed the fragrant building foundation pills to everyone. The disciples who received the pills were very excited and said, "Elder Xialan." Only Xianxia looked at her with a pitiful expression. Majugu couldn't stand it anymore. No matter how high her cultivation was, she was still from the qi refining stage. She could understand Xianxia's mood, not to mention that he was the husband she had decided for Xia. After the pills were distributed, she said to Ferdinand, "Dinan, take Xianxia to the Alchemy Pavilion now. The sooner things are settled, the better." "Yes," Ferdinand responded and said to Xianxia with a smile, "Let's go find your master to settle the account." He grabbed him and flew away. Before Xianxia could react, in just a few breaths' time, the two of them had already arrived in front of the Alchemy Pavilion's main hall. Ferdinand shouted towards the inside, "Guan Weiwu, get out here." Scaring the disciples who were about to come over to salute, they took a detour. "Old Fei, did you eat arsenic? Why is your voice so loud?" Guan Weiwu came out with wide eyes. Ferdinand smiled and said, "Look who I brought for you, Master." Xianxia saluted with infinite sorrow. "Xianxia." Guan Weiwu was a little surprised and looked at Ferdinand. "You are willing to return my disciple to me." "Return what?" "I came to ask you for building foundation pills." "Get lost." The refined building foundation pills were all given to the sect. "Where would I get building foundation pills for you?" Guan Weiwu's voice was not small. "Xianxia is your disciple and also a disciple of your Alchemy Pavilion. If you don't give him building foundation pills, who will?" Ferdinand rolled his eyes. "You want it?" Guan Weiwu looked at his disciple. Xianxia nodded pitifully. Guan Weiwu patted his forehead and said, I forgot, you should have a building foundation pill." Then he said to a disciple who had just passed by, "Go and call Yan Shu for me." Hearing Yan Shu was called, Xianxia suddenly felt a little bad. Sure enough, after Yan Shu came, he saw Xianxia at a glance. The two of them had a feeling of enmity when they met. "Yan Shu, give me a building foundation pill," Guan Weiwu said. "Building foundation pill?" Yan Shu was a little confused and said, "Elder Guan, other than the sect's building foundation pills, the rest have been distributed. Where would I have a building foundation pill?" Guan Weiwu frowned and said, "Nonsense, where's Xianxia's? He should have one." Yan Shu looked at Xianxia and immediately understood what was going on. He was secretly happy. In fact, when Fuxian Island reported disciples who needed building foundation pills, the Alchemy Pavilion was the one who reported it to Yan Shu. At that time he thought of Yu Qianchou. The latter was borrowed by Wanfen Garden. Should the Alchemy Pavilion report it? Because the two of them had a grudge, he had the idea of using public office to take revenge. He decided not to report it to Yu Qianchou. If Wanfen Garden reported it, it would be fine. If not, then Yu Qianchou was unlucky. Anyway, he had a reason, so he could not be blamed. He did not expect such a thing to really happen. Elder, at that time Yu Qianchou had already been transferred away. It should have been reported by the place where he was, so we did not report it here. Naturally, there was no building foundation pill for him. Now how could this disciple take out the building foundation pill? Xianxia said helplessly. Yu Qianchou was a little dizzy. Both sides had actually forgotten about him. He was afraid that Xianxia had done it deliberately. Ferdinand glanced at Xianxia coldly and snorted, "Nonsense. My own disciple still needs others to report it. If I say it to others, they will think that I am Yu Qianchou's master." Guan Weiwu scratched his messy hair. In his opinion, both sides were reasonable. In fact, it was a misunderstanding. He could not help but say, "What should I do? I can't do anything about it." Ferdinand sneered. "Hee, you can't do anything about it. You can talk to Jiugu yourself. Yu Qianchou was personally ordered by Jiugu to bring him to you. I can't stand it when she gets angry. Don't blame me for dragging you down with me." It's Jiugu." Guan Weiwu's face twitched. Obviously he was very afraid of Ma Jiugu. So he said to Ferdinand in a negotiating tone, "Why don't you take some spirit grass from the 10,000 fragrance garden to refine the building foundation pill, and I will refine it again?" Fart, the 10,000 fragrance garden only has a few spirit grass to refine the building foundation pill. Especially the main ingredients, they are very difficult to grow. Do you think the spirit grass is like chives? After a few days of cutting you can grow another batch? Ferdinand said in a bad mood. This is a big problem. Guan Weiwu's face was full of worry. His eyes glanced at Xianxia on the side and he suddenly said angrily, "It's all your fault for not being reliable. I punish you to immediately think of a way. Otherwise, your Alchemy Pavilion deacon position will be handed over to someone else." Chapter 68. Xianxia, who was secretly laughing at the side, was stunned by the scolding. Originally he could hide on the side and watch the fun after taking revenge. Who knew that Guan Weiwu's way of thinking was not reasonable at all? He actually vented his anger on him. However, his brain was really good. After a little hesitation he thought of a way and said, "The refined elixirs are distributed to the disciples on the island, and the rest are kept by the faction. If the two elders find the head and explain the situation, I think the head will definitely make an exception." Yes. Guan Weiwu nodded. Ferdinand also agreed. "Then let's go. What are we waiting for? Let's go." Guan Weiwu took the lead and flew away. "You go with us." Ferdinand grabbed Yu Qianchou and flew away. Xianxia looked at the three people flying away and smiled evilly. Yesterday he learned from his father that the few remaining foundation establishment elixirs in the faction had been given out as a favor. Before flying away, Yu Qianchou subconsciously turned his head to look at Xianxia. He could clearly see the smile on Xianxia's face as if his scheme had succeeded. He couldn't help but feel his heart skip a beat. If he hadn't guessed wrong, this trip would have been in vain. "Xianxia, if I still can't get the foundation establishment elixir this time, this matter must be related to you. If you dare to ruin my big plan, I swear to kill you." Yu Qianchou's heart was filled with killing intent. Even Ferdinand, who was holding him and flying, was shocked. With his cultivation and being so close to Yu Qianchou, he could naturally feel the strong killing intent of the person in his hand. It was not the kind of resentment of ordinary people, but the kind of iron-blooded ruthlessness of holding the power of life and death and deciding the life and death of others. He could not help but look at him a few more times. He thought to himself that an ordinary disciple in the qi refinement stage could make Aunt Jiu pay so much attention to him. This kid's origin was probably not ordinary. When the two landed in front of the Penglai Pavilion, Guan Weiwu had already entered. Looking at Yu Qianchou, who looked pitiful at first but now had an ice-cold expression, Ferdinand asked, "Yu Qianchou, what happened to you?" "I'm afraid we've come here for nothing again," Yu Qianchou said expressionlessly as he raised his head and looked at the room on the third floor. Ferdinand smiled and said, "You worry too much. The sect will always keep a few elixirs in reserve every time. Since Elder Guan and I came together, the sect leader will still give us some face. I hope it's not Yen Shu's doing. Yu Qianzhou's eyes narrowed as a cold light flashed through them. Ferdinand was taken aback and asked doubtfully, "Are you saying that Yen Shu, the son of Elder Yen Tuo, is playing tricks just now?" Yu Qianzhou nodded and said, "I have a grudge with this person." The Alchemy Pavilion doesn't have my Zhuji Dan. I'm afraid he did it on purpose. He suddenly raised his hand and pointed at the Penglai Pavilion and sneered, "I hope I'm wrong." Ferdinand looked thoughtfully at Yu Qianzhou, whose temperament was completely different from before. "Old Fei, why don't you come up? What are you doing downstairs? Come up." Guan Weiwu poked his head out from the window on the second floor. "Let's go. We'll talk after we see the sect leader," Ferdinand said. Yu Qianzhou nodded and did not say anything. Penglai Pavilion was still the same. Yu Qianzhou used to dream of getting an office here one day. Those who could have a room here were all at the level of an elder. Penglai Pavilion still looked the same as the government office building in his previous life. But now he was not in the mood. When the three of them came to the sect leader's room, Guan Weiwu shouted, "Is the sect leader in? Come in." The sect leader's majestic voice came from inside. Guan Weiwu pushed the door open. The three of them walked in and greeted first, "Sect leader." When the sect leader Feng Xiangtian saw it was Elder Guan and Elder Fei, he nodded and smiled. When he saw Yu Qianzhou behind the two of them, he could not help but be stunned. This Yu Qianzhou left a deep impression on him. He had almost brought him a lot of trouble. He had also heard about the matter of Yu Qianzhou being seconded by Ferdinand to Wanfen Garden to raise spirit herbs, but he did not take it to heart. Now that this group came, could it be that something had happened? "What are you guys doing?" Feng Xiangtian asked doubtfully. Guan Weiwu was the first to speak. He explained everything in detail and then said, "Sect leader, just give me a foundation building, Dan." Feng Xiangtian looked at the three of them and finally landed on Yu Qianzhou. He said, "No, it's useless to look for me." Ferdinand looked at Yu Qianzhou in surprise, thinking that Yu Qianzhou had guessed correctly, but he still asked, "Aren't there more Zhuji elixirs?" "No." Feng Xiangtian shook his head. "Senior brother, you can't be so stingy, right?" Guan Weiwu glared and said angrily, "If we were outside, even my disciples would have to call you martial uncle. You can't even bear to give a foundation establishment pill? My father even passed the position of sect leader to you. You don't even give me this little face." Bullsh *T. Feng Xiangtian was furious when he heard this. He pointed his finger and scolded, "What does this have to do with master passing me the position of sect leader? How dare you say such words? Your silly master can even forget his own disciples' foundation establishment pill. How dare you come here to make a scene? If it was someone else, I would have thrown him out long ago. There's no foundation establishment pill. If you're not convinced, you can follow me to Heaven Heart Pavilion to argue with master. Let's see how master will deal with you." Hearing that they were going to Heaven Heart Pavilion, Guan Weiwu's anger was immediately extinguished and he was speechless. Yu Qianzhou now knew that the previous sect leader was the current sect leader's master. Moreover, he was Guan Weiwu's father. In that case, he did not choose the wrong master. He was actually from the same lineage as the sect leader. Seeing that the gang leader of Fuxian Island was angry, he wanted to say a few words to explain for master. However, the level here was too high and it was not his place to interrupt. "Sect leader, don't blame old Guan. This matter was ordered by Ninth Aunt. We are really afraid that we can't explain it to Ninth Aunt when we go back. Please help us think of a way." Ferdinand smiled bitterly. Feng Xiangtian was stunned and said in surprise, "Why does this matter involve Ninth Aunt? Why would she?" He glanced at Yu Qianzhou and did not finish his words. However, everyone could hear the meaning in his words. The sect leader's recuperation prevented him from finishing his words in front of the younger disciples. Ferdinand shook his head and said, "I don't know. Sect leader, if there are more foundation building elixirs, just give one. It's not a big deal." In the eyes of these tribulation cultivators, the foundation building elixir was naturally not a good thing. It was not even a tonic. Feng Xiangtian glanced at Guan Weiwu, who was standing on the side without saying anything. He stood up slowly and said, "It's not that we don't want to give it to you. It's just that you are a day late. Yesterday, we received a Jade Archive letter from the Moon Clan leader, Xianxia Fairy. She said that she urgently needed a batch of foundation building elixirs and asked for Fuxian Island's help. You also know that the Moon Clan and Fuxian Island have always been on good terms. Moreover, Xianxia Fairy personally asked for it. Naturally, Fuxian Island has to help. I have already asked Elder Qin to personally send the remaining 20 foundation building elixirs on the island to the Moon Clan. How do you expect me to take out more foundation building elixirs now? Cabbages, yellow in the fields, lost their mother at the age of 3 or 2. There was no need to mention how bitter Yu Qianchou's heart was. Tears flowed uncontrollably from his stomach. His life was even more bitter than that of a cabbage. Although Yan Shu was unavoidable in this matter, he could not control the Moon Clan. They were the third largest sect in the cultivation world. How could a disciple in the last stage of the core formation realm influence them? How could such a coincidence happen to him? If this was not a bitter life, what was? You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.